I. Egypt, the cradle of ancient masonry. Y. Egypt, cradle of ancient masonry by Norman Frederick de Clifford, comprising a history of Egypt, with a comprehensive and authentic account of ascent resulting from many years of personal investigation and exhaustive research in India, Persia, Syria, and the Valley of the Nile. Illustrated. Philadelphia, The Lincoln Publishing Company, 1902. The Library of T*VO copies received May. St 1902 COPVRTQHTENTFLY class is a no. Copy Beavery entered according to Act of Congress in the year I-902 by Norman Frederick de Clifford, in the office of the Librarian of Congress at Washington. All rights reserved. GA /LFI CU to a Trinity of Hodi, HCSPCRT anti-demeration. Love. To 80 wife who so ably helped me in this my life's work, Egypt, the cradle of ancient masonry. Respect for the supreme councils of both the southern and northern jurisdictions, and to the sovereign Grand Inspectors General, 33 degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite wheresoever dispersed. Admiration for the memory of our revered brother Albert Pike, who made Scottish Rite Masonry what it is today. This book is most respectfully copyright C. de Cassio. Preface. LFRE, Masonry and Brotherhood are terms recognized at once as synonymous throughout the universe, conveying the very essence of love, goodwill, and unselfishness, and when practically applied in the various walks of life result in the greatest good to the greatest number. Such was the thought that prompted the author to undertake the preparation of Egypt, the cradle of Attisikjit masonry, after first receiving the light in India, and being brought face to face, in the eastern countries, with convincing evidences of the wonderful knowledge acquired by the ancient people. This knowledge, even from its first and superficial manifestation, commanded both intense surprise and admiration. It led to a determination to investigate, to the fullest extent, the meaning and purport of the numerous hieroglyphic inscriptions, symbols and characters found upon the ancient tombs and temples, so that the Masonic fraternity might understand, appreciate, and apply the teachings of the hierophants and sages of bygone days. In writing this work it was deemed expedient to refer to numerous Masonic authorities, due acknowledgement and credit being given to each. If, however, such has been omitted, it has been purely an oversight. That greater knowledge and more earnest devotion to Masonry, that higher and nobler manhood and purer thought and life, may follow a careful perusal of these pages is the sincere desire of. Chapter 1. Alexandria, the Antiquity of Masonry 1. Chapter 2. Ruined Temples, Masonry and Masonic Symbols 26. Chapter Il. Ancient Cities, Osirian Myth, Karma 47. Chapter 4. The Nile, Origin of the Name, Freemason, Scottish Rite Philosophy 71. Chapter V. Ancient Mysteries, Scottish Rite Philosophy 95. Chapter 6. Suez Canal, the Druzes, Their Manners and Customs 121. Chapter 7. Agriculture, Irrigation, Lotus Papyrus 147. Chapter 8. The Supreme Architect of the Universe 171. Chapter 9. Mosques, Tombs, Massacre of Mamluks, Heliopolis 199. Chapter X. Esoteric Teaching of the Scottish Rite, Brain and Thought 221. Chapter XL. Pyramids, Sphinx, Tombs 245. Chapter 12. Solomon, Death of Hiram, Gross Swastika 267. Chapter 13. Mummification, Transmigration, Reincarnation 291. Chapter 14. 16 Savi Hours, Lost Knowledge 31.5. Chapter 15. The Golden Fleece, Roman Eagle, Masonic Apron, What It Teaches 3 to the power of 9th. Chapter 16. Pyramids of Saqqaralishmatum, the Fayum Labyrinth 363. Chapter 17. Sun Worship, Zodiac, Masonic Allegories 387. Chapter XVIIL. A Voyage Up the Nile, Description of Tombs and Temples, Pro-Doric Columns 411. Chapter 19. Ineffable Degrees, Thoughts on Ecclesiastes I. Nr. 143.5. Chapter XX. Voyaging up the Nile, examining tombs and temples, paintings, sculptures. 461 Chapter XXI. Masonic teachings, Hindu, Beggar, Roman Catholicism. 485. Chapter XXII. Thebes, Colossus, Loderel, Bahar, Luxor, Karnak. 509 Chapter XXII. Ceremonies, Initiation, Blue Lodge, Transmigration, Mystery Language. 533 Chapter XXIV. The Gawazi, exploring temples and tombs, Phil/E and its ruins, Nubia. 557 Chapter XXV. Jewish traditions and customs, Cable Toe, ceremonies of ancient initiation, Book of the Law. 581 Chapter XXVI. Circumcision, upon what the ancient craftsmen were obligated, Lost Word. 605. Pagk Pompey's pillar from the cemetery, 4-carat harbor of Alexandria. 10 Cleopatra's Needle, Alexandria, now standing in New York City. 16 The Grand Square, Alexandria. 20 Exterior wall of the Temple of Dendera. 34 First Cataract of the Nile. 76 View of Aswan or Syene. 82 The ruined Temple of Ramses, Karnak. 100 Entrance to the Cave Temple of Elephanta, Bombay, India. 112 Ships passing through the Suez Canal. 128 Mohammedia Canal, Alexandria. 154 Carat propylon of the Temple of Ramses. 111 Karnak. 16 A Minaret. 182 Mosque of Akbar, Cairo. 202 Carat Fellahin ploughing with camels. 208 Mosque of Sultan Hassan, Cairo. 214 The Peristyle, Fli. 228 The Osiride Columns, Temple of the Mysteries. 232 The Kasr Nil Bridge, Cairo. 248 Officers and Grand Officers of the Southern Jurisdiction. 266 Temple of Hathor, Dendera. 282 Tombs of the Caliphs, Cairo. 294 Tombs of the Mamluks, Cairo. 300 Tomb and Mosque of Kate Bey, Cairo. 306 Island of Phil/E from the rocks of the cataract. 828 Sacred Lake of the Mysteries, Karnak. 334 Page The Little Temple of Medinet Habu Jachin and Boaz. 348 Distant view of the Pyramids of Giza. 366 Corner of the Great Pyramid, making the ascent. 372 Our Floating Home the Dahabiyah. 414 Rock Tombs of Beni Hassan. 432 Temple of Ramses. 4, Karnak. 446 Grand Officers of Northern Jurisdiction. 460 View of the City of Asy or 470 Hall of Columns, Temple of Dendera. 476 Entrance to Temple of Medinet Habu. 482 The Artist's Choice, Philly. 490 The Colossi, Thebes. 512 Carat The Ramesseum or Memnonium, Thebes. 526 Carat Hypostyle Hall of the Great Temple of Karnak. 530 The Great Sphinx. 536 Temple of the Mysteries, Thebes. 550 The Gawazi, or Dancing Girls. 560 Columns in the Court of the Temple of Edfu. 564 Rock Tombs at Gebel, or Hagar Silsilis. 568 Kosque, or Pharaoh's Bed. 574 Kamambas Temple of the Mysteries. 592 Interior view of the Cave Temple of Elephanta, Bombay, India. 610 Pylon of Temple, Karnak. 614 In this age of countless books and widespread literature, there is still remaining a vast field, both for the attainment of knowledge and its dissemination, by means of that ever useful, instructive, and entertaining type of literature, the historical narrative. In this connection, Egypt, the cradle of ancient masonry, is entitled to more than passing notice, not oxi from the general reader, but more particularly from the Masonic fraternity, for whose peculiar and especial benefit this work was conceived, undertaken, and completed. In all the ages which have elapsed since the mighty pharaohs swayed the destinies of the surging masses, composing the ancient empires, whose silent and impressive memorials stand as mute witnesses to the exceeding grandeur and glory of Egyptian civilizations, the savant and the scholar have been delving and exploring for the secrets which have been hidden within the concealed recesses of her tombs and temples. Years of untiring energy and zeal have been devoted by the author, Bro. N.F. de Clifford, to the accumulation of data, the very best part of whose life has been spent in personal investigation and actual research among the archives of India, Persia, Syria, and the Valley of the Nile. The work treats, primarily, as the title implies, of the infancy of Freemasonry, not only proving by natural deductions, and positive evidence its antiquity, but tracing its rise and progress, and the glorious fruition to which it has attained at the present day. Beginning, in the opening chapter, with the founding of the city of Alexandria b.c. 332, a vast storehouse of knowledge, beneficial instruction, and pleasurable entertainment is unfolded in charming sequence, until the lost word is finally reached in the closing chapter and the narrative ends. To every Masonic student, in fact to every Mason, knowledge is an absolute essential in the attainment of that perfection on which depend the higher degrees, and toward which we should ever strive with unceasing effort. An actual personal examination of the evidences inscribed upon the tombs, temples, and monuments in the Valley of the Nile, in India, Persia and Sj. would doubtless be of intense interest to every sincere and earnest Mason, but should environment prevent, the graphic description herein contained will constitute a most acceptable and authentic substitute. With sincere gratification upon the completion of this valuable addition to Masonic literature, with due appreciation of the unselfish labor of love bestowed by the author for the advancement of Masonic knowledge, and with the earnest hope that more light may result to every inquiring Mason, from the stud and perusal of these pages, I have the honor to present Egypti Caratlic Cradle of Aishasine Masonry. John Arthur, Past Master St. John's Lodge No. 9, F. and A. M., Deputy Grand Master of Grand Lodge of Washington, Past Potentate of Phi Temple, A. A.O. N.M. S., and member of all other M/Sonic bodies. Seattle, Washington, May, 1902. Carat case and tria carat enti cultkoi jjlazoifrg. CBC Nile. The Nile. I bear its gathering roar, no vision now, no dream of ancient years sproned on the rocks, amid TB watery war, CBC king of floods, old Bomer's Nile, appears clip gentle smile, majestically sweet. Curling TB billowy steeds T-bat vex them at bisfeet, Lord Lindsay. Chapter I Alexandria The Antiquity of Masonry. 5 IHK City of Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great, b. CEJ 332, and here at the age of 32, in the 13th year of his reign, he was buried with all the pomp and splendor of that age, and today there is not a single stone to mark the spot where this great warrior was laid to rest. This city was bequeathed to the Roman Empire by Ptolemy Alexander, b. c. 80, but it was not until 50 years later that it became an imperial city, with a Roman governor who was appointed by the Emperor Augustus. In A.D. 640 Alexandria was captured by the Arab Caliph under Amru, a Saracen, who wrote to his master the Caliph Omar that he had taken a city containing 4,000 palaces, 4,000 baths, 12,000 dealers in fresh oil, 12,000 gardeners, 40,000 Jews who pay tribute, and 400 theaters or places of amusement. From this account of Amru we are enabled to form some idea of what a magnificent city it must have been. History informs us that this city was second only to Rome, with an immense population, very highly civilized, and possessed of a most wonderful knowledge in mechanical arts and sciences, great carat bej carat and the comprehension of our architects and men of letters. This city had 2 libraries, the Soter and the Serapeum, and it was in this celebrated city that Mark suffered martyrdom and Peter preached Christianity. The modern city stands partly on what in ancient days was known as the island of Pharos, but which is now a peninsula. The old city was built on the mainland close to and nearly adjoining the modern town. The ruined walls of this ancient city are to be plainly traced, and the Old reservoirs which were constructed over 2,000 years ago are still in a good state of preservation. Few remains of the ancient city are to be found at the present time, and it is only when workmen make excavations that fragments of pilasters, statues, etc., may be seen, which belong to the Alexandrian and Ptolemaic age. How well I remember M. first visit to Alexandria as we came steaming along up to the harbor of this remarkable city, on board the Peninsular and Oriental Company's sidewheel steamer Ripon from the island of Malta, one never to be forgotten, lovely Sabbath morning. Shortly after sunrise we saw the sandy shores of this most wonderful country and rising up into the clear azure sky, seemingly, from out the very ocean itself, was that far-famed and justly celebrated column known as Pompey's Pillar. Next to view came the lighthouse, and the boats with their lateen sails, the harbor and the shipping, from whose masts float the flags of many nations, then the vercarat unpretentious-looking palace of the Khedive with its whitewashed walls on the Raset tin, and last, but not least, the numberless windmills. All these various things seem to impress themselves upon my brain, and these scenes remain with me and come back at memory's call whenever the name Bgypt or Alexandria is mentioned. I was quite a boy when first I saw that celebrated city and visited it with my father during a vacation from school, and since then I have traveled through nearly every country upon the face of the earth and sailed on every sea and ocean. I have visited Alexandria many times in later years, but the memories of my first visit seem to recall the scenes and incidents which charmed and fascinated me in my boyhood's happy days in the long ago. The donkey boys of Alexandria are a feature in themselves. The hackmen of our own country, in their most palmy days, could not begin to compare with the cool, rascally impudence of these celebrated boys. Just as soon as you land from your boat they will crowd upon you, and nolens volens forcibly drag you along, actually lifting you into the saddle and compelling you to ride their patient, enduring little animals. These boys prevent their donkeys from running away, when not working, by simply tying up one of the forelegs, instead of hitching them as we do our animals to a post or fence. They give their donkeys very peculiar LJHUJLLIOUJXOCCLLDC in LUQ_OQ_ names, such as Napoleon, John Bull, Yankee Doodle, Mark Twain, Moses, Jesus Christ, etc. The Grodd Square or Place Mohammed Ali formerly called the Place DCS Consuls, is the most noticeable place in Alexandria today, and reminds one of a European city. It is embellished with beautiful trees and fountains, with a very fine equestrian statue of Muhammad erected in the center. The statue is 16 feet high and stands upon a pedestal of Tuscan marble, 20 feet in height, making the monument in all 36 feet. The whole square is surrounded with magnificent edifices, and among them are some very fine hotels with all our modern improvements. They have some very fine stores here that will compare favorably with any of those in our own cities. In this square are located some of the prominent public buildings, and it is the regular promenade for the Europeans and Americans who live there. In fact, all classes of people go there to enjoy themselves after the business hours of the day. We visited Pompey's Pillar, located a short distance from the city, which stands upon a mound 40 feet high, as near as I can remember. According to some historians, this as the site of the Serapeum, situated in the Egyptian quarter of Rakitis near the catacombs. This celebrated pillar is constructed of red granite, no doubt brought from the quarries of Syene, near the first cataract of the Nile, on the borders of Nubia, to which we shall refer later on. Pompey's pillar stands upon a square base or plinth, and bears a Greek inscription which most certainly proves that it was erected to honor the Emperor Diocletian. The shaft is composed of a single piece of granite, 7.3 feet long and 29 feet 8 inches in circumference, crowned with a Corinthian capital 9 feet high. The base is about 15 feet square, making the column nearly 100 feet in height. It is one of the first objects to be seen on approaching the harbor of Alexandria, and it is well worth a visit. A party of English sailors, while ashore on liberty one day, flew a kite over this monument, and in this way they placed a string over it, then they drew over a stouter and stronger one, until, eventually they succeeded in drawing up a rope ladder, by the means of which they ascended to the top and displayed 3-carat the British flag upon its summit. They discovered a cavity on the top, in the capital, showing that at some time or other something must have occupied the hollow, and it has been claimed by some writers that a statue once stood there. This pillar does not in any way owe its name to the great Pompey, who was murdered off the Egyptian coast by his ward Ptolemy, but to a Roman prefect of the same name, who, as is proven by the inscription it bears, erected it in honor of the Emperor Diocletian, the guardian genius of the city, in return for a gift of grain he had sent to the Alexandrians during a year of famine no doubt. The 2 obelisks that are called Cleopatra's Needles were erected at Heliopolis in B.C. 1500 by Thutmose III, one of the greatest Egyptian pharaohs, in order to commemorate victories over his enemies in the Golden Age of Egypt. The were brought from that great city of the sun for the express purpose of decorating the temple of Castor, the Caesareum, in Alexandria, during the reign of Tiberius. One of these stupendous monoliths was given to the English government by Mohammed Ah, and after considerable delay it was finally shipped to England in the year 1877, where it eventually arrived. Having passed through great danger of loss by shipwreck, and stands today upon the Thames embankment, a relic of one of Egypt's grandest monarchs. The dimensions of this stone are 68 feet long and 7 feet 7 inches across the base. The other one was brought to New York, by Commander Gorringe, in the year 1s80. This obelisk is 71 feet long, and 7 feet 7 inches at the base, measured across the face of the stone. I have often sat upon the companion stone, as it laid lengthwise beside this monolith, deciphering the hieroglyphics and pondering upon the glory that belonged to a people who built such magnificent monuments to adorn the banks of their grand old river Nile. Both of these obelisks were quarried in Syene, and are composed of the same kind and quality of granite as that in Pompey's pillar. These monoliths were erected to honor one of Egypt's mighty warriors nearly 35 centuries ago, and yet, now, they are the admiration of people not in existence when this great and powerful king conquered the Maharania of Mesopotamia, and blazoned upon their stony sides the deeds that he had done to thoroughly establish his kingdom, upon the banks of the river Nile, in the hoary civilization of a far-away past. When Commander Gorringe lowered this magnificent monolith from its pedestal in Alexandria, in order to ship it to America, they found beneath the stele a number of Masonic emblems as an apron, a trowel, a trestle board, the 2 ashlars, etc. The discovery of these emblems, placed beneath this mighty monolith by our ancient brethren, must most assuredly demonstrate to the present generation that the peculiar rites and ceremonies practiced by the speculative masons of the 20th century, in erecting and dedicating their monuments and temples, were not only performed by the practical, operative masons at the beginning of our present era, but in every epoch of the world's history. This proves the verity of our rituals, in the statement that masonry has existed from time immemorial, and that the most intelligent men in every age have been members of our most illustrious fraternity. There were 2 libraries in Alexandria during the reign of the Ptolemies that were the envy and admiration of the nations of antiquity. Ptolemy Soter was the founder of the one that bore his name, and he collected a very large number of books for the especial purpose of drawing together the most eminent scholars and learned men of the world for the improvement of the sciences, arts, philosophies, etc., and founding in Alexandria a museum or college like that of the Royal Society of London, England, or the Royal Academy of Paris, France. There is no doubt but Ptolemy Soter communicated his love of learning, the development of the intellectual qualifications, as well as the collecting of valuable books, to his son Ptolemy Philadelphus, for we positively know, from the historical records of that age, that this young king, previous to his father's death, sent learned men to all parts of Greece and Asia, to collect the most valuable books to be found in those countries, and bring them to Egypt, in order to grace and adorn the shelves of the library in Alexandria, and to enrich the collection that had already been made by his father. Ptolemy Philadelphus followed up the work, so ably begun by his predecessor, in enlarging the Soter library, already established in the Gio Bruchame Carat, then the most magnificent quarter of the city, the abode of royalty, and the location of the splendid palaces of the Ptolemies. He also organized and established a library in the Serapeum, the celebrated temple of Serapis, the principal building of the Gio Rakites, or regular Egyptian quarter of the city. This celebrated building was of such remarkable magnificence and beauty that it rivaled those glorious buildings of the Roman capital. According to the best authorities, the Serapeum occupied the site of the mound whereon stands Pompey's pillar, and that column is said, by some writers, to have formed a part of this remarkable edifice. The structure was supported by firmly built arches, distributed through various subterranean passages. The building itself was surrounded by a quadrangular portico, leading from which were most magnificent halls and corridors, wherein was placed exquisite statuary that demonstrated their knowledge in the arts, while the books upon the shelves showed the source from whence they derived their wondrous knowledge of science and philosophy. But the triumph of the Soter and Serapeum libraries was in the presence of the most learned men and scholars, who came from all quarters of the earth, men who had passed through the various stages of culture and refinement, in their own countries, and had been attracted to this wondrous city of Alexandria by the stupendous development belonging to the Egyptian civilization during the dynasty of the Ptolemies. Ptolemy Euergetus appropriated all the books that were brought into Egypt by foreigners, no matter from whence they came, or who they were. He placed them in the libraries, and when the owners made complaint about the seizure of their books, they were given a copy, but the original would remain in the library, and in this manner he was enabled to gather an enormous number of the most valuable works, all of which were added to either the Soter or Serapeum libraries, until, according to Callimachus, who was the librarian under Ptolemy Euergetus, a catalogue of the books was formed and the two libraries classified. By arranging them into 120 classes, he found that there were 700,000 in the Soter and 400,000 in the Serapeum. I do not wish to enter into a description of the Alexandrian school of literature and philosophy, but simply to state that all peoples were benefited by Egyptian civilization and her marvelous intellectual advance. It is a well-known fact that the Alexandrian philosophers and scholars devoted a vast amount of their time and attention to the translation, into Greek and other languages, of the priceless treasures that had been placed upon the shelves of these most magnificent libraries. In disseminating their knowledge throughout the world, be translations into a language common among the learned men of that age, they benefited all mankind, some of whom made antiquity illustrious with the knowledge gained through drinking from this most glorious fount of ancient Egyptian wisdom. There are various conflicting accounts of the destruction of the magnificent Soter library and it has been very difficult for me to decide as to which is the true or the false, because there has been a vast amount of evidence brought forward by various writers, for and against, which, as I say, makes it difficult to arrive at a decision, but after careful investigation I have come to the conclusion that all the priceless volumes upon the shelves of this stupendous library were destroyed by the order of the Caliph Omar, in AD 641, after Amru took possession of Alexandria and its libraries. History informs us that a celebrated peripatetic philosopher and a friend of Amru, called John the Grammarian, lived in Alexandria at the time it was forcibly wrested from the Persians by the Arabian general Amru, BC 640. John went to him immediately and requested that he give him the books contained in the Soter library. Amru told him it would be impossible to grant such a request himself, but that he would write to the Caliph Omar for his consent. The Caliph, on receiving the request from Amru, made answer thereto that if those books contain the same doctrine with the Quran, they could be of no use. Since the Quran contained all necessary truths, but if they contained anything contrary to that book, they ought to be destroyed, and therefore, whatever their contents, he ordered them to be burned, in consequence of which they were given to the public baths of the cit to be used as fuel, and we are informed, by the best authorities, that these priceless treasures of knowledge and information supplied those furnaces with fire for a period of 6 months. It is also positively asserted, by some historians, that by an order of the Christian, Theodosius, the Serapeum was sacked, the books destroyed, the magnificent building pillaged, and the exquisite statuary broken. What had been the admiration of the civilized world, the very center and source of intellectual development, was completely destroyed by fanatical and bigoted Christians. There are many other accounts of the destruction of these libraries and their contents. One relates that a fire destroyed the valuable treasures, both books and building. Some writers give one account and some another, but one thing is certain, and that is they were destroyed. By whom, when, or how, it is difficult to decide, but we are positively certain that the destruction of these libraries was assuredly one of the most barbarous and unpardonable acts ever committed by the hand of man. This vandalism resulted in the suppression of the Greek school of philosophy, and turned the European world into the dark night of Christian barbarism that hung over the people like a deadly nightmare for 1200 years. The Christians have branded this era of Christian domination the Dark Ages. Alexandria has 2 harbors, the Old or Western, and the New or Eastern. The former is most decidedly the better of the two. It has a good anchorage close to the town, with from 20 to 40 feet of water. A very fine breakhook irrigator protects the old harbor, allowing shipping to lie safely at anchor at all times of the year without fear of wind or storm. There are 3 entrances leading into this celebrated harbor, but the middle is the principal one, considered to be the best, and the one most generally used. It is fully a quarter of a mile wide, is well marked and buoyed, so that pilots have no difficulty in taking vessels through this channel into the deep water of the harbor and pointing out the anchorage. The eastern or New Harbor is very seldom used on account of its exposure to the heavy winds from the north. At one time this harbor was the only place in which Christian vessels were allowed to anchor. It was never considered safe, in fact it was more like an open roadstead, but now we seldom find vessels in the New Harbor, because the Old Harbor is now in common use. Shipping from all parts of the world may be seen lying safely at anchor, side by side, in one of the best ports in the Mediterranean Sea, the Old Harbor of Alexandria. Ah! What glorious days I have spent in sailing from one harbor to another, examining the various points of interest and listening to the QZ, XUJ_JLLOCCOMCC legends and stories told by my friend and companion, Abd el-Bilik. I have much enjoyed a visit to the breakwater, to the queer Turkish fleet of old-fashioned men of war, with their 3 and 4 tiers of guns, the palace on the Rasettjn, and the ancient site of Pharos, the celebrated lighthouse, as well as sailing around Pirates Bay, the strong hold of the ancient Greek and Phoenician sea rovers, who made this bay their headquarters long centuries before the great Alexander was born. I have often sat upon the thwart of our boat, when becalmed of a lovely moonlight night, and watched the twinkling lights of the shipping in the distance, and the swarth faces of our boatmen, pondering upon the glory of ancient Egypt and the hoary civilization on the banks of the Nile, when our great ancestors were digging clams with stone hatchets in the lagoons of Europe, and the altars of the Druids ran red with the blood of human sacrifice. The catacombs of Alexandria are not very extensive, and are of Egypto-Greek origin. Strabo states in Book 17, page 795, that the quarter where it is placed had the name of the necropolis. I did not find anything of especial interest in these receptacles of the dead, but I simply call the attention of my readers to the place and the fact that they can be easily found by simply calling a donkey boy, jumping onto his little animal and telling the boy where you want to go. It is not far and the trip will only cost you about $0.25. It is close to Pompey's Pillar and 3 carat. You can visit both places on the same trip. There are quite a number of places one may visit on donkey back, and very enjoyable ones, more especially if you have friends to accompany you. The Pharos, or lighthouse, was situated on the extreme point of the island of Pharos. Its foundation was commenced by Ptolemy Soter, but was not completed until the reign of his son and successor, Ptolemy Philadelphus, about the 3-year B.C. 2s3, at a cost of 800 talents. It was constructed of beautiful white marble and built in the shape of a tower that was 552 feet high, on the top of which a fire was kept continual burning, said to have been distinctly visible 42 miles at sea. It was erected for the purpose of directing sailors into the Badge and harbor of Alexandria. History informs us that the following inscription was carved upon it: King Ptolemy to the gods, the saviors, for the benefit of sailors, but Sostratus, the architect, who was desirous of having the honor of erecting this magnificent edifice, cut his own name upon the stones of the tower and covered it with cement, upon which he lightly chiseled this inscription. In the course of time the cement decayed, disappeared, and dropped from the face of the stone or tower, taking with it the name of Ptolemy, and in its place was to be seen, Sostratus the Cnidian, son of Dexphans, to the gods, the saviors, for the benefit of sailors. This justly celebrated lighthouse, or tower, was considered to be one of the wonders of the world. The population of Alexandria during the reign of the Ptolemies was estimated at near 500,000, but it dwindled down to a few thousand at the end of the 18th century. Today it has a population of 240,000, 60,000 of whom are Europeans, principally Greeks, Italians, French, and English. According to Josephus I, 31, he estimated the population of the city at 300,000, and the whole of Egypt at 7 million. It was in the Cit on the steps of the Caesareum, that Hypatia, the maiden philosopher of Greece, was brutally murdered by order of Archbishop Cyril in the year A.D. 415. She had been lecturing to the assembled thousands in the immense auditorium of this magnificent structure upon her favorite questions: where are we? What am I? What can I know? And where am I loved? By her eloquence and the subjects chosen for her lectures she drew immense numbers to hear her, at the same time evoked the envy and wrath of the Christians, which eventually led to her destruction and the suppression of the Greek school of philosophy, to which I have previously referred. At her death, when the glorious theosophical and philosophical truths were stamped out, it gave great power into the hands of the early church fathers, revolutionizing the whole world and bringing on the dark ages of Christian barbarism, or the rule of the Catholic Church over the people, for long, weary centuries. At this time, it was considered proper to kill anyone, even a bosom friend or nearest relative, if they dared to advocate a religion that was inimical to the Catholic faith, and we should ever remember that from the 4th to the end of the 17th century, the Catholic Church dominated the whole of the European nations, their governments, laws, literature, religion, sciences, and philosophies. Human rights were unknown, while ignorance, outrage, oppression, and injustice ruled supreme. The tentacles of the Roman Catholic octopus enwrapped the most intelligent men of the age in its deadly fold and drank the lifeblood of countless thousands. All literature not officially sanctioned or approved by the Romish Church was proscribed under the penalty of death, and Dr. Draper informs us that men in terror burned their libraries in order to save themselves and families from destruction. From the commencement of the Christian era until the end of the 18th century, the Romish Church, in its cruelty and bigotry, gave to human rights and individual liberty not the shadow of a chance to believe according to the dictates of its own conscience. In fact, the Romish Church in those days was kept busy hunting out, condemning, and burning at the stake witches and heretics. During this age the jack and stake were the happy face, ailed persuaders to bring both men and women into the bosom of Holy Mother Church. Dr. Dick, an ecclesiastic writer, says that 100,000 of Germany's most intelligent men and women were burned alive at the stake during the 14th century for the crime of witchcraft alone. John Wesley, the celebrated divine, informs us in his sermons that the religious contentions and persecutions were so fierce and unsparing during this age of Christian brotherly love that 40 millions were slaughtered within the short space of 40 years. Was ever record of death so awful and appalling as this? But, thank God, we have passed beyond the damnable power of this Roman Catholic octopus. They know their hold upon the people is gradually but surely slipping away, and it is 011 a question of time when the Romish Church will be, like her most firm adherent and supporter Spain, a thing of the past, for with her downfall on this American continent, the dawn of a new light and a new era will beam forth. As man stands erect within the rays of effulgent glory, with arms outstretched to welcome the coming of this new light that will give him free thought, free conscience, and free government, the cross of bondage falls behind him into the shadows of the dark past, among the falling ruins of the Romish institutions that have in every age been the most bitter and relentless foe of education, in free secular schools, because, so long as they can keep the world and people in ignorance, just so long will they be enabled to rule it with their nightmares. My dear brothers, let me quote you parts of two speeches that were made by two Methodist ministers at the Methodist Convention held in St. Paul's Methodist Episcopal Church, New York, November 19, 1900. Bishop Goodsell, of Tennessee, while speaking of the work that was being done by their missionaries in southern Europe, said, "There are many who doubt whether we have done any work in Italy, the land of superstition and priestcraft, whether we could ever hope to accomplish a thing there, in the face of the tremendous press of adverse thought with which we are confronted. The fact is, we sent one of our workers into it as star. He soon made up his mind that in Rome we had to do as do the Romans. He began by training the three young, by taking them into oyer schools and seminaries. The work is slow, but its value has been recently testified to by the pontiff himself, who has honored us by excommunicating every one, teachers and pupils alike, connected with our institutions of learning. In his effort to preserve for himself the triple crown of papacy, he has issued a sweeping interdiction against the schools, and every one passing through their gates. This, however, has only made us more determined to wipe out a system which has created, out of a former man of empire, a cringing beggar with a monkey and a grind organ." At the same place and during the same convention the Rev. Dr. C. W. Dries said, "Christendom is divided into two camps, with Protestantism on one hand and Greek and Roman Catholicism on the other. The time is upon us when, anew, the questions which appeared in the Protestant Reformation will begin to agitate the world, and demand to be pushed to their final issue. After slumbering through 4 centuries, these self-same questions were awakened, by the last act of infani carot, of the pontiff in declaring himself infallible. Within 23-4 hours after that blasphemous declaration had been written, on the Triple Crown of Rome, the Prussian armies invaded Catholic France. 45 days later the Battle of Sedan was fought, with Protestant Prussia the victor. And 20 days only had elapsed when the united armies entered the Holy City where the Pope held sway, bringing with them carloads of Bibles. The Pope lost his temporal power, and since that day the creed has been weakening. The Roman Church at one time held sway everywhere, but now both that Church and Spanish domination have fallen off their high pedestals. When Spain is arraigned, the Catholic Church should be arraigned with that power as correspondent. Ever since Isabella signed away the liberty of Spain to the Pope there has been illegitimate alliance between statecraft and priestcraft against human liberty and human progress. The Caesarium was commenced by Cleopatra, but, it was not finished until long after her death. Then it received the name Caesarium, to honor the Emperor Augustus, in whose reign it was finished, and it was dedicated to his worship. Philo, of Alexandria, who lived in a.d. 60, gives us a description of this magnificent temple, stating that it was facing a secure harbor, filled with votive offerings consisting of pictures and statues of gold and silver, and surrounded with a vast enclosure containing priestly residences, a library, sacred grove, propylae, and large apartments, all open to the air, and all richly ornamented. It became a Christian cathedral during the reign of Constantine. It was burned by the soldiers of Constantius, restored in A.D. 365 and completely destroyed by the pagans during the reign of Valentinian and Valens. It was then rebuilt once more in the year A.D. 30 by Athanasius and remained the cathedral church of the Patriarch of Alexandria until it fell into the hands of the Arabs in the year A.D. 640, when Amrou captured the city. It once more became a Christian church in the year A.D. 727, and remained so until it was completely destroyed by fire in the year A.D. 912. There are a great many places of interest, in the city and immediate vicinity that will well repay one for the time expended in visiting them, for instance, the Mahmudiya Canal, Lake Merotis, the Salt Works, the Palace on the Raset Tin, Ponapej-S Pillar, Catacombs, etc. One of the most delightful trips for me was a visit to the site of the celebrated Pharos, whose tower is said to have been destroyed by an earthquake in the year A.D. 1203, the ruins of which are still visible beneath the waters of the sea on any calm day when the water is smooth and unruffled. One can spend a very pleasant day in visiting the town of Ramleh. The botanist will here find a fertile field in which to ramble for collections, as here, Arroy and Alexandria, he or she will be enabled to obtain specimens of over one-half the entire flora of Aoipt. The flowering season is said to begin about Christmas in the vicinity of Alexandria, after the winter rains are over, but, of course, the abundance of flowers depend in a great measure upon the autumn rainfall. If these rains start about the latter part of October and continue through November, flowers of every variety will be found in plenty in the following season, which is said to begin about the 1st of January. At this time Dame Nature comes forth in her most charming colors, although many beautiful plants and flowers are to be found at all seasons of the year. The only fern that is to be found in Aoipt is the common made Anheridni capilius veneris L. There are many southern European and British plants to be found in the marshlands at Gaberi, near the shore of Lake Merotis. The most characteristic part of the botany of Aoipt are the aquatic plants that are generally found in various canals and many of the ancient water courses of the old river, as well as the lakes and marshes near the shore, where the water is quiet and placid. The average rainfall at Alexandria is 12 inches. Alexandria, Egypt. What a host of recollections these names recall. They carry me back to the land of stupendous temples and the ruins of a prehistoric civilization. After carefully examining the ruined temples in the wondrous valley of the Nile, searching among the tombs and ruins that lie scattered broadcast from one end of it to the other, I find that masonry has existed through all ages, and has been the admiration of the most intelligent men of every epoch of the world's history. Verifying the statements made by our rituals that masonry has been in existence from time immemorial, and I most firmly believe that our glorious fraternity can date its origin back more than 2,000 years before the building of the temple by our three grand masters. This event took place, according to Josephus, in the second month, which the Hebrews call Jur, and in the 11th year of the reign of our Grand Master, Hiram, king of Tyre. I also firmly believe that it would have been simply impossible, for such a grand and glorious fraternity as ours, to have sprvmg into an immediate existence simple j in building the temple. J f rntntv Cleopatra's Needle, Alexandria, now standing in New York CITV. Upon the threshing floor of Oman, the Jebusite. Practical, operative masonry was thoroughly comprehended long centuries before that event, as is evidenced by those stupendous and magnificent temples that existed in the land of Old Kemi, upon the banks of the Nile, ages before David, king of Israel, bought the land from Oman, whereon to erect a temple to the Most High God, in which to practice the esoteric teachings handed down to us from one generation to another. There is, at the present day, scattered all over Egypt, India, Syria, the valley of the Euphrates and the plains of Shinar, monuments and ruins of temples covered with hieroglyphic inscriptions, showing beyond the shadow of a doubt, that ancient masonry had its origin long centuries before the dawn of authentic history, back beyond the dim realms of the ancient myths. These wonderful fabrics were erected by our ancient brethren, who most assuredly possessed a far greater knowledge of the mechanical arts and sciences than is known to the architects of the present day. Otherwise they could not have built such stupendous buildings, or carried across the desert sands such enormous blocks of stone, with which to build the temples in which to perpetuate the peculiar rites and ceremonies of our most illustrious fraternity, as well as to celebrate the Most High God of Israel, and I firmly believe that those ancient teachings have been handed down to us, until we find them, at the present day, across the threshold of this wonderful 20th century, a monument of glory to the most eminent men of all ages and through all time. Herodotus informs us that the high priests of Thebes were in direct line for 345 generations, and instances are recorded wherein the occupation of architect has descended from father to son for 22 generations. It is a well-known fact that the knowledge of the Egyptians was concealed from the lower classes, and if they wished to communicate any of their esoteric teachings to the learned men of other countries, it was given to them, accompanied with peculiar signs and symbols. Certain rites and ceremonies had to be performed by the priests at the initiation of the neophyte into the fraternity, and every brother, elu, knight, or prince had proof positive that each and all of these sublime theosophical and philosophical teachings and ceremonies originated in the far-away East, the land of the Vedas, under the very shadow of the Hindu Kush and Himalaya mountains. The student in Masonic lore will find the signs and symbols used in our illustrious fraternity today identical with those used by our ancient brethren long centuries before Christ, and many of these signs and symbols are to be found engraved upon the walls of the tombs and temples of the ruined cities throughout Egypt, Assyria, and India, from the cave temples of Nubia, across the dark waters, and beyond the cave temples of Elephanta and into the far interior of the land of the Vedas. He will realize that there is no portion of these countries in which traces of masonry cannot be found, from the symbolic serpent of the Garden of Eden to the symbol of Christianity carat, the cross, or ancient nilometer, that was in use long centuries before Moses was born, even to the emblems placed thereon. To the student of symbolism the field is inexhaustible, and the true meaning of each and every one of them ought to be especially interesting to the members of our ancient fraternity, because we practice the rites and perform the ceremonies just as they have been handed down to us, ever remembering, as Brother Albert Pike says in his Morals and Dogmas, page I06, *, the ceremonies and lessons of these degrees, Blue Lodge, have been for ages more and more accommodating themselves by curtailment and sinking into commonplace, to the often limited memory and capacity of the master and instructor, and to the intellect and needs of the pupil and initiate, that they have come to us from an age when symbols were used, not to reveal carat but to conceal carat, when the commonest learning was confined to a select few, and the simplest principles of morality seemed newly discovered truths, and that these antique and simple degrees now stand like the broken columns of a roofless druidical temple, in their rude and mutilated greatness, in many parts also corrupted by time, and disfigured by modern additions and absurd interpretations. They are but the entrance to the great Masonic temple, the triple columns of the portico. Yet, notwithstanding all these things, we must certainly admit that Masonry and its precepts have been miraculously preserved, through the long drifting centuries, by our ancient brethren, who endeavored to reveal the symbology that had come down through various epochs from time immemorial. Every initiate must assuredly admit that it is a wonderful organization, because through the rise and fall of empires, through the changing forms of civilization, in every country throughout the world, it has ever and always preserved its onward march, and time's devastating hand itself has, through every age, seemingly nurtured and fostered our most illustrious fraternity, through the wreck of mighty empires. It has withstood the shock and force that destroyed Babylon, the queen city of the world, with her wonderful hanging gardens and stupendous palaces. Egypt and her golden age has passed away with her wondrous knowledge of the mechanical arts and sciences. Cultured Greece with her marble miracles, and imperial Rome has bowed their mighty heads beneath the dust of centuries, fallen never to rise again, while masonry, our glorious fraternity, without any territorial possessions, without any particular race or power to sustain it, comes forth from the misty veil of the past, sublimely grand and beautiful. It stands today across the threshold of the 20th century, a monument of glory to those Elus whose watchwords were morality and truth, and who were ever and always opposed to tyranny and fanaticism, devoting their lives from one generation to another to the destruction of ignorance, whose hearts were filled with benevolence, charity and brotherly sympathy to all men. They were ever directed, by honor and dicty, to study the profound symbology of ancient masonry, to give it their most earnest and profound attention. By so doing they might thus be enabled to attain a far greater knowledge of its sublime meaning, and be better prepared to help their aspiring brothers starting up the ladder, to a knowledge of those beautiful teachings that contain the same altruistic ideas which have ever led men on to light and truth, through every age of the world's history. These teachings enable them to practice the esoteric truths of high morality that bind us all in fraternal bonds of Masonic love, fitting us to lead higher and purer lives. In mingling with the outer world they might demonstrate to every man that Masonic precepts engender a love of morality, virtue, and truth that will never die, but will live forever, to the honor and glory of our most illustrious fraternity and to the supreme architect of the universe. Tri-ladder, to which I referred above, with its 7 steps or rungs, are to be found in all the ancient mysteries, as a very important symbol, that will demonstrate to our aspiring candidate his passage from rock to man, or unfold to his wondering gaze nature's evolutionary processes. This symbol was used in the Indian mysteries for the express purpose of reminding our aspirant that the EIONAL pilgrim or soul had to pass through 7 different stages or planes in order to reach perfection. The rites, as performed in India by those hierophants of old, taught men that perfection is reached by gradual stages, and that knowledge could very easily be gained by simply reading the thoughts of others. If we desire to become wise and attain IVIS.UN, we must climb the ladder ourselves, or in other words, JJ-C must think for ourselves. In the Mazdeen mysteries, in place of the ladder, they used the 7 ascending caverns that led the aspirant on to the same conclusions and knowledge of self and its divine possibilities. In fact, all the rites of the ancient mysteries embodied the same idea of the septenary, for in each and every one the candidate was conducted through variant states or stages, each representing different planes of being, until he stands upon the topmost rung of the ladder in the dazzling light of wisdom. Having thus attained the culminating point, he now understands himself, and consequently knows that he stands in the presence of his God, and realizes that he and his Father are one, and that he shall go no more out. I do not wish to dilate upon the profound philosophy that underlies our symbology at the very start, but shall endeavor to lead you, by gradual stages, to the understanding of many of our beautiful symbols, and show you the road that will enable you to come to an understanding of the holy doctrine, a knowledge of which will unfold to you the royal secret. There are secrets or hidden truths, and most profound ones, embodied in every emblem belonging to our glorious fraternity, and we possess the key to the true meaning of their sublime esoteric truths, and will unfold them as we proceed with our work. The temperature in the city of Alexandria is never so high as in Cairo or Upper Egypt, which is due to the blowing of the northwest winds. The mean temperature here ranges from 60 degrees F in winter, to 75 degrees in summer. There is considerable humidity in the atmosphere in LD, F, QOLLIX. All of the coast towns, hence the heat is much more oppressive than in the interior, although the days are much cooler and the nights much warmer than in those cities farther inland. There are quite a number of Masonic lodges in the city of Alexandria, working under the English, Scotch and other jurisdictions. The meetings are held in different buildings in various parts of the city. Those of the English meet in the Boulevard Ismailia, while those of the Scottish jurisdiction meet in the place Mohammed Ali. The Royal Archmasons are well represented here, so is the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, wherein are taught the glorious symbology of ancient Masonry in all its sublimity and grandeur, from the time that our aspiring candidate passes between the two columns that established in strength the wisdom that permeated her sanctuaries, until he fully comprehends the true meaning of the mystery of the balance. Then, like the initiates of old, he must do his duty, stretch forth his hand, and lift his brother by the wayside to a knowledge of truth. In lifting the infant Moses from the throbbing bosom of the river Nile, Pharaoh's daughter gave to humanity one of the brightest men of the world's history. We also, who have ascended the ineffable heights, and have learned the esoteric meaning of the various symbols and allegories permeating the ceremonies of our glorious rite, should not hide its sublime teachings from the brother who is searching for light and truth, and who is following the path that we ourselves have trod. We should share with him the knowledge that we have gained in our arduous climb, for by sharing with him the light which illuminates our path, we may be enabled to help him on to higher planes of spiritual unfoldment and to a knowledge of his higher self. Masonry has its Decalogue, which is a law to its initiates. These are its 10 commandments. First, God is the eternal, omnipotent, immutable wisdom and supreme intelligence and exhaustless love. Thou shalt adore, revere, and love him. Thou shalt honor him by practicing the virtues. Second, thy religion shall be, to do good because it is a pleasure to thee, and not merely because it is a duty. That thou mayest become the friend of the wise man, thou shalt obey his precepts. Thy soul is immortal. Thou shalt do nothing to degrade it. Third, thou shalt unceasingly war against vice. Thou shalt not do unto others that which thou wouldst not wish them to do unto thee. Thou shalt be submissive to thy fortunes, and keep burning the light of wisdom. Fourth, thou shalt honor thy parents. Thou shalt pay respect and homage to the aged. Thou shalt instruct the young. Thou shalt protect and defend infancy and innocence. Fifth, thou shalt cherish thy wife and thy children. Thou shalt love thy country, and obey its laws. Sixth, thy friend shall be to thee a second self. Misfortune shall not estrange thee from him. Thou shalt do for his memory whatever thou wouldst do for him, if he were living. Seventh, thou shalt avoid and flee from insincere friendships. Thou shalt in everything refrain from excess. Thou shalt fear to be the cause of a stain on memory. Eighth, thou shalt allow no passion to become thy master. Thou shalt make the passions of others profitable lessons to thyself. Thou shalt be indulgent to error. Ninth, thou shalt hear much, thou shalt speak little, thou shalt act well. Thou shalt forget injuries. Thou shalt render good for evil. Thou shalt not misuse either thy strength or thy superiority. 10th. Thou shalt study to know men, that thereby thou mayest learn to know thyself. Thou shalt ever seek after virtue. Thou shalt be just. Thou shalt avoid idleness. But the great commandment of Masonry is this: a new commandment give I unto you, that ye love one another. He that saith he is in the light, and hateth his brother, remaineth still in the darkness. Brother Pike says, such are the moral duties of a Mason. But it is also the duty of Masonry to assist in elevating the moral and intellectual level of society, in coining knowledge, bringing ideas into circulation, and causing the mind of youth to grow, and in putting, gradually, by the teachings of axioms and the promulgation of positive laws, the human race, in harmony with its tinies. Huanitrasi CMPLCSI hasten J Audi TDS carat iginables. CBC Ruins of 6GYPT Arc. The tattered pages, CBC archives of the nation passed away, disc-recrop bants and ancient sages lived mid the scenes that we tread today, to wander midst the stupendous glory of ancient 6GYPT, in her golden age, HND. As we ramble read the story, 0CN, passing on, we turn the page. Chapter 2. Ruined Temples, Masonry and Masonic Symbols. Ace was the most important city during the Semitic Empire, and the one which gave its name to the period when the Theban Empire yielded her exalted position to the growing power of the cities of the Delta, extending from the 20th dynasty to the conquest of the Valley of the Nile by Alexander the Great in the year B.C. 332. During this period many magnificent temples and tombs were erected that were the admiration of the learned men of Greece and other countries, many of whom went to Egypt for the express purpose of acquiring knowledge and information not obtainable in their own countries, and where they perfected their studies in science, art, and philosophy peculiar to the golden age of Egypt. The tutelar deity of this ancient cit of Sais, was the goddess Neith, whom the Greeks identified with their Athene. She is very often represented with a weaver's shuttle, and is also frequently seen armed with bow and arrows, corresponding to the warlike goddess of the Greek Minerva, worshipped both by the Egyptians and the Libyans. There is no question in my mind, but, that this identification of Neith with Athene caused Pausanias to believe that Pallas Athene originally came from Libya, to which Sais was frequently considered to belong. If the Egyptians did really conceive of the goddess Neith as weaving, it was only in a figurative sense, as creating. Upon her temple was inscribed, /am the things that have been, and that are, and that will be, no one hath ever me unveiled. Herodotus gained a vast amount of knowledge and information from the priests of the city, as well as from his personal observations, and so did hundreds of other prominent men who came from all parts of Greece and distant countries to acquire a knowledge of the profound philosophy, sciences, and architecture, which belonged to these ancient people, who not only erected the pyramids and sphinx, but adorned their wondrous valley and delta of the Nile with such stupendous monuments, that they have been the admiration of the world down to the present day. It was here in Sais that Solon associated with the Hierophants of Egypt, and Cambyses also visited this celebrated city after he had conquered the land of Egypt. He not only admitted his being an initiate, but he showed himself favorable to the rites and ceremonies of the mysteries, as practiced in the temple of Neith, by permitting it to stand as a monument to the fraternity in all its magnificence, just as he found it, and the very fact of his doing so proves that he was not only an initiate, but an hierophant, who, like others before him, had seen the light. His name was Ameth. He had passed through the purifying elements, and had most assuredly witnessed the glory which filled the sanctuary B3 on the veil shrouding the ivory portal. In seeing this ineffable mystic glory and having been thoroughly instructed in the esoteric teachings, like other initiates, he recognized the presence of the Supreme Architect, as manifested in the beauty and grandeur of the outer world. His mind must have been enlightened by the Hal doctrine, a knowledge of which not onl purifies the heart from sin, but drives ignorance from the mind, and ensures the favor of the gods, thus opening the gates of immortal felicity to all who have passed beyond the veil. The barriers have now been rent asunder and the initiate begins to understand himself and realizes that although he is blind to his surroundings and the knowledge which permeates the cosmos, yet he carries the light of all knowledge within his heart, within his own hand, that will light him on to the highest planes of intellectual and spiritual development. He will appreciate the fact that by the exercise of the inner vision all wisdom is at his command. Every man who stepped across the mystic portals of the ancient mysteries followed in the same paths trodden by those who had gone before. They learned the same lessons, received the same light and vowed the same vows. In this wa3 the carat were bound b a tie stronger than chains of brass, and consequential they would always endeavor to build up rather than tear down. Thus it was that Cambyses permitted this celebrated stroke Tur to stand. He himself had fed the sacred fire upon the altar and had identified himself with the hierophants who presided over the ancient mysteries within this celebrated temple. Today there is no trace of this wondrous temple, or the royal palace and mausoleum of the pharaoh is connected with it. Nothing now remains of the glory pertaining to this once celebrated city, but a few fellahin dwellings, claiming the name of Sais, whose glory reached the four corners of the earth. But, today, the villagers only assume the first two letters of the old name and call it Sa. In the ancient city of Sais there was a chapel that had been hewn out of a single block of granite, brought from the quarries of Syene, the weight of which must have been fully 300 tons. Herodotus tells us of the magnificence of this wondrous city and the grandeur of the tomb of Osiris, whose columns were adorned with palm capitals. The statues and the rows of androsphinxes which led up to the entrance of the temple were most magnificent specimens of the best Egyptian sculpture. He also tells us of the sacred lake, etc. But at the present time there is very little of it to be seen to give us an idea of its size and beauty, excepting an irregular sheet of water and portions of an immense wall that is 65 feet wide and about 1,500 feet long. This wall, however, verifies the statement of Herodotus respecting the lake, and to satisfy one that it must have been a magnificent city, in its palmy days, as they never built such stupendous walls around ordinary cities. Few relics of this once famous city have been brought to light, and all that greets the eye of the traveler or tourist now visiting this place, is ruin, utter ruin. Santanis or Zoan, was a city of very great prominence during the time of Moses, and it was in this place that both he and Aaron compelled Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage, through the wonders they performed in the field of Zoan Exodius Y, Lo and Psalms J8, 12-J. The site of this celebrated city is occupied today by Arab fishermen, who call their village San which is the Arab form of the ancient Zan or Zoan. The inhabitants of this place are the lineal descendants of the Blamites and Bashrausites. They were also known as Malkites. Polio were, during the Christian domination, firm adherents of the Orthodox Church, but who were quite willing to embrace el-Islatu when the opportunity offered. These people are, in many respects, like their great ancestors, rude and uncultured, and extremely uncivil, treating all tourists and travelers with scant respect, but especially is this so if they be Christians. If it were not for the expectation of obtaining a goodly bakshish from those who go to this place in order to examine the ruins and site of the field of Zoan, they would be far more uncourteous. The Greeks call this village Tanis, but the Egyptian name agrees with that in the scriptures, which corresponds to the monumental name of this celebrated city. The truth of this assertion has verification from the statue found here, which is to be seen in the Museum of Antiquities, bearing an inscription stating that the individual it represents was a governor in his town, a magnate in his province and a prefect in the towns and fields of Tan, meaning Zan or Zoan. It was here the celebrated stone was found that was called by the French La Pierre de San. It was that famous trilingual stone, containing Greek, hieroglyphic and demotic characters, known to the Egyptologists as the Decree of Canopus, that constituted an edict promulgated by Ptolemy Euergetus in the year B.C. 237 at Canopus. Then the religious capital of the country. The original stone is now to be found in the Museum of Antiquities, Giza, near Cairo. There are two plaster casts of this stone, one of which has been placed in the British Museum, the other in the Aberdeen University, Scotland. This limestone tablet or stele was discovered by Dr. Lepsius in the year 1866. It was the writing on this stone which established the correctness of the method of deciphering the inscriptions on the celebrated rosette stone, or stele, by Champollion and others. Stele is the name that is given to tablets of granite, limestone, wood, or faience, so often found amid the ruins of tombs and temples in the valley of the Nile. They were used for the purpose of inscribing upon them the various decrees, historical records, victories of the various pharaohs or kings of Egypt and biographical notices of prominent men and officials. In fact, anything of importance would be inscribed upon these stills. The largest number of these stones have been found placed inside the tombs, generally in the passageway leading into the mummy chamber. They have also frequently been found placed just inside the door or entrance to the sepulchre, as well as at the bier, and a great many are to be seen set into the walls of various tombs throughout Egypt. They vary in size and shape, according to the fashion of the dynasty in which the individual lived. Sometimes they were rectangular, at other times lozenge or oval shaped, but each and every one of them were inscribed with the name of the deceased, generally setting forth the principal events of their lives, as well as their pedigree, titles, etc., etc. It is very difficult to tell the exact date of the origin of the city or by whom founded, but from the scriptural account we are enabled to learn that the city of Zoan was built 73 years after Hebion was established. See Numbers/J22. The branch of the Nile on which this famous site carat of Zoan was situated was called the Tanatic. It was the most easterly branch of this grand old river and nearest to Palestine and Arabia, if we accept that of the Pelujak. There is no question but that the city grew in importance and power during the New Empire, and when the Hyksos, in their warlike expeditions overran and dominated this northern part of Egypt, Tebay found established here a race kindred to their own. Consequently they made the city their capital, and at once proceeded to adorn and beautify it with most magnificent buildings and sculptures of all kinds, employing none but Egyptian artists to do the work, specimens of which were discovered by Mariette, who threw a vast amount of light upon this period of Egyptian history. The rather peculiar type of sphinxes that he found here he attributed to these shepherd kings. He also stated that the probabilities were, that at the time one of these kings was reigning in Memphis, Joseph was sold into Egypt and may have served under him, for, as he says, this pharaoh was not a pure-born Eg3 Caratchan, but of foreign parentage, of shepherd descent, like himself, and the treatment Joseph received, based upon this supposition, is far more easily understood. Under the 13th dynasty the city received a great impetus. Quite a large number of VNRY fine monuments and colossi were erected by Amenemhat and the two Usertesans, remains of which are to be found in the Museum of Giza, all testifying to the importance of Zoan at that period. Although the city had reached such importance at that time, the sanctuary of the Great Temple dates back to the 6th dynasty, b.c. 3703, plainly showing the rise and fall of this wonderful city during various epochs of Egyptian history. During the lives of the monarchs of the 29th dynasty it was decorated and adorned with magnificent statues, obelisks, and most exquisite works of art, and the rulers of this dynasty, Sethi, Ramses II and Meneptah, often came here to hold their court and join in the sacred rites and ceremonies of the ancient mysteries. It was under the 21st dynasty, b.c. that Tanis or Zoan became the capital of Egypt Ankh-Famor, and gave its name to the D3 dynasty, and also to that branch of the river Nile on which it was situated. Under this administration the public buildings and temples were restored, the needs of the city carefully attended to, and its avenues beautified, but it again fell to a city of secondary consideration, although Marietta claimed that it was a town of great importance from the 22nd to July 26th dynasty. He gave the name Tanite to the 23rd dynasty 3 carat. The city again began to decline during the reign of Amasis, by whom the capital of Egypt was removed to Sais, making Naucratis the sole port of entry for Egypt, and compelling all vessels to go there to load or discharge their freight. In consequence of which Naucratis soon grew into prominence, becoming one of the best known cities in EG3 PT. It was located about 15 miles west of the capital of Egypt, Sais. This decree of Amasis making Naucratis the sole port of entry for Egypt was the cause of its rapid growth, for it gave to this place special privileges. Herodotus tells us that this king, Amasis, was partial to the Greeks, and induced them to come and settle in Aoy-Pt. Amasis had recognized their bravery and power during his war with Apries. Consequently, when they immigrated to this land of Egypt and established themselves at Naucratis, this great king did all in his power to help them, because he knew he would be enabled to depend upon them in case of war. He afterwards verified his good opinion of them, for when the Persians invaded Egypt he mustered them into the Egyptian forces, and led them on to assist him in repelling the invaders. They responded to his call and assisted him in establishing himself more firmly in the hearts of his countrymen and in the land of Egypt. Amasis was born in the town of Neoph, of poor and humble parents, but, through his wonderful abilities, his high intellectual power and force of character, he rose to the high and exalted position of ruler, or pharaoh over Egypt, and over this great and mighty people. In attaining this exalted position he was not looked upon as a legitimate Kayug by the higher classes, because Th&Y considered it to be an infringement upon the ancient constitutions of the Egyptians. The kings of Egypt had always been chosen from among the priests or soldiers of the country, but as he belonged to neither one nor the other he was considered to be ineligible, and the prominent men endeavored to have him deposed. As he was supported by the people, who had placed him upon the throne, they were compelled to abandon their opposition and acknowledge him as king and pharaoh of Egypt. Herodotus tells us in the second book Euterpe, chapter 172, at first his subjects looked down upon him, and held him in but small esteem, because he had been a mere private person, and of a house of no great distinction, but after a time Amasis succeeded in reconciling them to his rule, not by severity, but by cleverness. Among his other splendors he had a golden footpan, in which his guests and himself were wont, upon occasion, to wash their feet. This vessel he caused to be broken in pieces, and made of the golden image of one of the gods, which he set up in the most public place in the whole city, upon which the Egyptians flocked to the image, and worshipped it with the utmost reverence. Amasis, finding this was so, called an assembly and opened the matter to them, explaining how the image had been made of the footpan, wherein they had been wont formerly to wash their feet, and to put all manner of filth within it, yet now it was reverenced. And truly, he went on to say, it had gone with him, as with the footpan. If he was a private person formerly, 3et now he had come to be their king. And so he bade them honor and reverence him. Siike was the mode in which he won over the Egyptians, and brought them to be content in his service. Amasis was one of the first kings of whose personal character we know anything, and from the records that have been preserved we find that he had a very strict sense of honor and justice. It is positively known that he devoted himself to the interests of his country and the intellectual advancement of his fellow men. He possessed those qualities which not only endeared him to his soldiers and countrymen, but commanded the respect of the prominent men of all other nations. He loved pleasure, but when business of the nation required his services, he gave the whole of his time and attention to those requirements. He was a wise king, ruler, and hierophant of the mysteries, and enforced the law, compelling every Egyptian to appear once a year and demonstrate to the governor of the nome, in which he lived, that he was earning an honest living, to enable him to support his wife and family. Failing to prove this, the penalty was death. Draco made this same law in Athens, but afterward Solon repealed it on account of its severity. This Egyptian king and hierophant thoroughly understood the pole star of truth, and endeavored by his own conduct to demonstrate to all men that the teachings received from the ancient Mthistries were most sublimely grand and beautiful. He knew full well there was no royal road to the understanding of its profound shambology, science, and philosophies, and in order to attain to a keen knowledge of the rites, ceremonies, and esoteric teachings of the various degrees, he would have to devote his time to it earnest study, profound attention and the soul's deep meditation, before he would be enabled to comprehend the ineffable beatiety of the rites and ceremonies. Like others who have passed beyond the majestic portals, he realized that without it he would simply pass through the ceremonies of the ancient Mthistries of Egypt, but the sublimity and grandeur of the teachings would be as incomprehensible as the veiled statue of Neith, Isis, in the Temple of Sais. Masonry is a peculiar system of morality, veiled in a ledger, and illustrated J symbols. But we must distinctly understand that ritualism is not Masonry. The glorious teachings embodied in the ethics of Masonry are, and ever will be, in existence, having been taught and promulgated through every age. And it did not require the building of Tj Temple B Solomon to demonstrate the profound morality that belonged to our glorious fraternity, for it has had a continuous existence through every epoch of the world's history. XCR_JQZLJQLL09, LCLLILLIXLLODCOCRUJ9LUR, J carat. The profound wisdom contained in the veiled symbols is most beautiful and sublimely grand, and, as I have herein before stated, the real meaning of the various symbols, belonging to Masonry, must be carefully searched out before the student can ever hope to understand the faintest glimmer of their true meaning. This cannot be told the aspiring candidate too often, that, in order to come to an understanding of the true meanings that are embodied in our symbology, he must learn the meaning contained in the very first degree, as herein lies the key or combination to those above. Through all countries in the world, from the cave temples of India to those of Nubia, through the valley of the Nile and its delta, as well as in Chaldea, Assyria, Greece, Rome, and even amid the tropical growth of long drifting centuries in Mexico and Yucatan, are to be found, at the present day, in all these places, monuments and ruins of temples covered with signs, symbols and hieroglyphic inscriptions going to prove, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that our glorious fraternity has existed in each and every one of them. If you will take time to search for yourselves, as I have done, you will find that free Masonry must have originated in India, and that it was cradled upon the banks of the Nile, beyond the dawn of authenticated history. Here in this extremely interesting valley will be found ocular demonstrations that our ancient brethren were not only speculative, but practical, operative masons, who beautified and adorned the world with magnificent specimens of their work, from the gopuras and temples of India, the pyramids and stupendous fabrics of Egypt to the marble miracles of Greece and the grandest ruin of Rome, the Colosseum. In the valley of the Nile our ancient brethren have demonstrated their knowledge in gigantic temples and colossal monolithic statues. The Arundel marbles in the British Museum speak louder than 1,000 tongues to testify to the sublimity to which they had attained in sculpture. The Acropolis and Parthenon are in ruins, but even as they are, in their mutilated grandeur, they testify to the men of cultured Greece and to the names of those craftsmen who wrought them. All these things go to prove that our practical, operative brethren of a prehistoric age thoroughly comprehended the mechanical arts and sciences, otherwise they never could have quarried and carried across the desert sands, such stupendous blocks of granite with which to build their imposing temples, wherein they practiced the rites and performed the ceremonies in a manner similar to our ancient craftsmen long before Moses officiated in the temples of Egypt. These same sublimely beautiful ceremonies stand today across the threshold of the 20th century, as a monument of glory to our most ancient and illustrious rite and the supreme architect of the universe. Those who believe in the supreme architect of the universe can unite with us, in the Masonic fold, upon the level and true points of fellowship which unite and bind us all in fraternal bonds of Masonic love, teaching to each and every one the glory of the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. Albert Pike states, in Morals and Dogmas, page 726, that religion is the crown of morality, not its base. The base of morality is itself. The moral code of Masonry is still more extensive than that developed by philosophy. To the requisitions of the law of nature and the law of God, it adds the imperative obligation of a contract. Upon entering the fraternity, the initiate binds to himself every Mason in the world. Once enrolled among the children of light, every Mason on earth becomes his brother, and owes him the duties, the kindness, and sympathies of a brother. On everyone he may call for assistance in need, protection against danger, sympathy in sorrow, attention in sickness, and decent burial after death. There is not a Mason in the world who is not bound to go to his relief when he is in danger, if there be a greater probability of saving his life than losing his own. No Mason can wrong him to the value of anything, knowingly, himself, nor suffer it to be done by others, if it be in his power to prevent it. No Mason can speak evil of him, to his face or behind his back. Every Mason must keep his lawful secrets, and aid him in his business, defend his character when unjustly assailed, and protect, counsel, and assist his widow and orphans. What so many thousands owe to him, he owes to each of them. He has solemnly bound himself to be ever ready to discharge the sacred debt. If he fails to do it, he is dishonest and forsworn, and it is an unparalleled meanness in him to obtain good offices by false pretenses, to receive kindness and service, rendered him under the confident expectation that he will in his turn render the same, and then to disappoint, without ample reason, and just expectation. Masonry holds him also by his solemn promise to a purer life, a nobler generosity, a more perfect charity of opinion and action, to be tolerant, catholic in his love for his race, ardent in his zeal for the interest of mankind, and the advancement and progress of humanity. We are positively certain that the esoteric teachings of both the lesser and the greater mysteries were never revealed to anyone who was not considered to be worthy and well qualified to receive them, but we must distinctly understand that all those who had received the light from the lesser were not always considered worthy to pass across the threshold of the greater mysteries. In order to be enabled to attain to these rites and ceremonies, they had to stand the test of being proven worthy to receive them, and if they were permitted to enter through the sacred portals, they had to pass through the most profound and sublime ceremonies before they were entrusted with the key to the symbology which would enlighten them, and lift the veil to their searching and bewildered gaze, thus revealing the ineffable glories that lay beyond the mystic portals. It must be thoroughly understood that in joining a Masonic lodge a man does not immediately become a truer, purer, or better man, it simply shows him the light of truth, and impresses upon him T/M/ there is no religion higher than truly J. Neither will he at first see the beauties, nor understand the mystic ceremonies, for he will be blinded, as it were, by the effulgent light that permeates the sanctuaries of our glorious fraternity, when he will at once realize that the keynote to a thorough knowledge and understanding of the sublimity and grandeur of the ceremonies of our beloved Scottish Rite is meditation and earnest study. Any Mason, be he Elu, Knight, or Prince, who is interested in the origin of the symbols and teachings of our ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, can in India, Egypt, and other countries, have ocular demonstration in signs, symbols, and Masonic emblems, which have been in existence thousands of years before the building of the temple by our three Grand Masters, wherein to practice the esoteric teachings of our most illustrious fraternity, teachings that have been the admiration of the most profound men of every epoch in the world's history. Symbols appeal to the eye, and impress themselves upon our memory, as oral instructors to the ear. The level is symbolical of equality and teaches us the universal brotherhood of man. The square is an emblem of justice, for, as Brother Fellow states, it was the means in Egypt of establishing the boundades of lands that had been obscured or carried away by the inundations. It is a very ancient symbol, and like many others we cannot trace it to any particular nation or people. It does not derive its chief importance from the operative Mason, but rather from the speculative. We know that it was held, as a most profound sacred symbol, among the ancient Egyptians, for it was always carried in all their grand and solemn processions, by certain officials who were called stalists. In our symbolic degrees it teaches NS honesty of purpose, and fair dealing to all men. The plum teaches us to learn to subdue our lower animal passionate nature, it is the symbol of unerring exactitude. The mosaic pavement is most assuredly symbolical of the human life, checkered with good and evil, forcibly emblematic of man's career, as each day we stand upon the bright square of hope or the black square of misfortune or adversity carried. Today we are crowned with joy and happiness, tomorrow we may be filled with sorrow and tribulation. It teaches us to walk upright before all men, in humbleness of heart, and to assist our weary brother by the wayside, for we do not know the day nor the hour when we, ourselves, may need the help of those we have assisted. The tessellated border symbolizes the manifold blessings and comforts continually surrounding us, but the blazing star in the center comes down to us from those ancient adepts, who named not only the signs of the zodiac, but every star that glitters in the infinitude of space. Let us go back beyond the golden age of Egypt, when the arts and sciences were flourishing, which, centuries later, furnished the embers from which leaped Grecian culture and Roman civilization. What a sweep backward must the imagination take in order to appreciate the almost bewildering stretch of time from the present day, of this 20th century, to the earliest ages of Egyptian civilization, when the people of this wondrous Valle Carrot watched for the sign which assured them of all that was necessary for the sustenance of themselves, and the preservation of their domestic animals. And this sign was a brilliant, luminous star, appearing upon the eastern horizon in the early evening, which they called Sothis, or Anubis the Barker, the same as we call Sirius, the dog star. Its appearance warned the people who occupied the lowlands adjacent to the river Nile, of approaching danger, that they might be enabled to go to higher ground and escape the flooding waters. About this time these waters came rushing down from its interior sources, from unknown regions in Central Africa, bearing within its bosom immense quantities of decayed organic substance that deposited itself evenly over the whole of the flooded country. This acted upon the parched and thirsty soil as a rich and powerful fertilizing agent, fructifying and causing all things planted to grow in abundance. All the fellahin had to do was to scatter their seed broadcast upon the soil, trample them in with their domestic animals, and when the waters subsided watch their crops grow luxuriantly and reap 1,000-fold what they had sown. No wonder, then, they eagerly longed for the coming of this glorious symbol which was to them a harbinger of the fruits of the earth and the fullness thereof, for to them the glorious river Nile was an emblem of God the Father, who brought to their very doors the necessaries of life. So we find it upon the floors of our temples an emblem of faith in the goodness of the Supreme Architect of the universe. The overflowing of the river Nile was considered by the ancient Egyptians a demonstration of the activity of the Osirian triad, because they considered that Isis personified the earth of the Nile Valley and Delta, but not the whole earth universal like Sebkarat, who was the representative of the earth in all its wonderful manifestations and differentiations. But they believed that Isis personified the rich black land of the delta and valley of the Nile, on both banks of the river, as far as Thebes, and beyond, to the first cataract, where all things grew in such luxuriant abundance, and that she would continue to give to the ever succeeding generations, from her inexhaustible productive forces, all that was necessary for the sustenance of man and his domestic animals living in this wondrous valley of the Nile. How did she produce these wonderful manifestations? Simply by the union of Osiris with Isis. Osiris personified the river Nile, which overflows its banks and takes Isis in his loving embrace, thereby uniting, every year, the river Osiris to his beloved Isis, and from this union comes forth the virgin harvest which represented Horns the sun, and thus we have the Egyptian triad of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. Egypt. How well I remember thy fertile valley, thy glorious river, and the evidences of thy former grandeur, whose splendors not only filled the ancient world with admiration and wonder, but compel the learned men of today to stand with awe before thy mighty monolithic statues and gigantic structi, res, whose very ruins represent the tattered pages of the archives of one of the grandest nations the world has ever known, and the evidences of a remote and wonderful civilization. We can gather a vast amount of knowledge and information respecting her manners and customs, science, arts, and philosophies in the study of her tombs, temples and monolithic sculptures, as these things represent the stony leaves that have been written with pens of steel. Although her temples have fallen into decay and her innumerable statues and obelisks destroyed, broken into fragments and carried off by vandals, there remains no doubt a very large number of priceless treasures, still lying shrouded beneath the drifting desert sands, whose covering is even now being removed. We may possibly be enabled to recover many of the treasured secrets of the Golden Age of Egypt that will throw more light on the knowledge and wisdom pertaining to ancient Eotians and the craftsmen who wrought in the quarries in those golden days of long ago, in order to erect the temples which today lie scattered broadcast throughout the length and breadth of this most extraordinary valley. In viewing these magnificent ruins I was filled with marvelous admiration for the majesty of their proportions, their wonderful strength and beauty, and the extraordinary knowledge of the mechanical arts and sciences possessed by the ancient craftsmen in their construction. I recognized that they represented the thoughts of men who lived in the hoary ages of a far-away past, whose very names, if known, would command our most profound respect and admiration, men who rocked the cradle of ancient masonry in the land of the mighty pharaohs, long centuries ago. There is but little to interest the traveler of today in the field of Zoan, and he will realize that what was once the splendid palaces and temples of Egypt's mighty warlike kings, are now dwelling places for the lowly fishermen of San, amid ruins of tombs, temples, monuments, and fragmentary statues that lie scattered around in the wildest confusion imaginable. The drifting sands are slowly and silently covering up the remains of what was once one of the grandest cities of Lower Egypt, whose fame reached the four corners of the earth. The principal divinities worshipped in the field of Zoan were Ta, Amen, and an Asiatic divinity called Set, or Sutek, but which was afterwards worshipped under the form of Ra, Horus, etc. The country in the vicinity of Tanis is low and marshy land, with scarcely any vegetation excepting reeds and dwarfed tamarask bushes, among which wild boars are often to be found. A canal runs through it now, and still it does not fertilize the soil. Fire passed through Zoan, and it is desolate. Ezekiel 30:14. There are immense numbers of all kinds of waterfowl that will afford good sport to the traveler or tourist, and help to replenish their larder if they camp as they go along. Whoever comes to this place should not forget to bring a goodly supply of insect powder and oil of pennyroyal, the first for the fleas whose name are legion, and outnumber those of San Francisco 10-1, the oil of pennyroyal to ward off attacks of the bloodthirsty mosquito and the pertinacity of the miserable Egyptian fly. Egypt was divided into nomes or cantons, for administrative purposes, and each nome was presided over by a governor or monarchly appointed by the king himself. A nome consisted of one of the principal cities, and the surrounding villages that were in a measure dependent upon it. The duty of each monarch was to superintend his canton, see to the collecting of revenues, etc. In fact, all the details of the government were attended to either by him or his deputies, and he was held personally responsible for all their acts, as well as his own. In the Delta there were, according to Strabo, Book 17, 787-10 of these nomes, and the same in the Thebaid, while the intermediate country was credited with 7, growing at a later date into 16. Each nome had definitely established boundaries, originally laid out by order of the early rulers. These nomes eventually grew to the number of 50, 3 among them being included in the Greater and Lesser Oasis and the Oasis of Anion. All these were divided into toparchies, but of what size we are unable to say. Each of these nomes sent delegates, who were accompanied by the chief priests and priestesses of the principal temple in their nome, to the general convention that met, at stated times, in the magnificent palace of the Labyrinth, near Lake Moeris, of which I shall speak later on. At these conventions, possibly, the king presided and administered justice in accordance with the law, and it was, no doubt, used for the same purpose as our legislature. B/Ibasius. This ancient city is now called Tel Basta. The Pibest of the Scriptures, Ezekiel 30:17, is situated on the west bank of the Pelujak branch of the Nile, about 14 miles north of Belbase, in very low mossy land pregnant with malaria, fever, etc. This was the site of one of the most ancient cities of Lower Egypt, and the ruins to be seen there today attest to her former magnificence and grandeur. The lofty mounds of brick that protected the city from the annual inundations of the Nile are such ancient proof of its antiquity. Herodotus, in Book 2, Chapter 137, claims that these mounds were formed by Egyptians who, having committed some offense, were compelled to raise the ground in the vicinity of the city to which they belonged. In consequence of this a great many cities in the delta of the Nile rose far above the plain, safe from the flooding waters of old god Nilus. He especially mentions Bubastis as having been raised to a greater elevation than any other city in Egypt, which was a noticeable fact in his time as well as in our own. As early as the reign of Uskurma-ira, Ramses II, the Great, these mounds began to rise around the city when that great warrior king connected the waters of the Red Sea wdth the river Nile, b.c. 1340. This city was no doubt of considerable importance, at least 34 centuries ago, during the reign of the wall builder, Thotmes III. It received its death blow when Amasis made Sais his capital and fixed the seat of his power in his favorite city Sihanouk. Karat and Bubastis, like Tanis and other cities of importance, began to sink into insignificance. Bubastis attained its highest importance and power under the 22nd dynasty, whose first king was Sasankhais, the conqueror of Thebes, who united in himself the two crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, besides making his native city the capital, and source from which emanated all his mandates. The student of ancient Egyptian history and Masonic tradition will recognize the magnificence to which the city had risen under the various D3 masties, ranging from the second Memphite of the old monarchy, C. Manetho, until its decline and subsequent fall. It began to lose its power when Amasis issued this famous edict making Naucratis the only port of entry in Egypt. The annals of the celebrated red granite temple of the city, extending back beyond authenticated history, substituted the glory of each succeeding dynasty. Its ruins of today form one of the grandest pages of the archives of ancient Egyptian history. This magnificent city and red temple won the admiration of Herodotus, see Book 2, chapters 137-8, whose description is very accurate. In relation to it he says, "Here is the goddess Bubastis, which well deserves to be described. Other temples may be grander, and may have cost more in the building, but there is none so pleasant to the eye as this of Bubastis." Then he goes on to describe it as follows: excepting the entrance, the whole forms an island. 2 artificial channels from the Nile, one on either hand of the temple, encompass the building, leaving only a narrow passage by which it is approached. These channels are each 100 feet wide and they are thickly shaded with trees. The gateway is 60 feet in height, and ornamented with figures cut upon stone 6 cubits high and well worthy of notice. The temple stands in the middle of the city, and is visible on all sides, as one walks around it. The city has been raised by means of an embankment, while the temple has been left untouched in its original condition. You can look down upon it wherever you are. A low wall runs around the enclosure, having figures engraved upon it, and inside there is a grove of beautiful tall trees, surrounding the shrine containing the image of the goddess. This enclosure is a furlong in length, and the same in breadth. The entrance to it is by a road, paved with stone for a distance of about 3 furlongs, which passes straight through the marketplace in an easterly direction and is 400 feet in width. Trees of an extraordinary height grow on each side the road leading from the temple of Bubastis to that of Mercury. This temple was sacred to the goddess Bast, who personified the springtime warmth of the sun. Pusht, the Bubastis of the Egyptians, is often represented with the head of a cat, or, in the older sculptures, with a lion's head crowned with a disc and uras, like the sun god Ra. The disc and lion indicate her connection with the solar deity, while the Ares was a symbol of immortality, and was generally worn upon the forehead of a king or queen. It is also an emblem of royal 5-carat. This deadly asp rears itself on the brow ready to strike and defend the wearer from his or her enemies. Bubastis of the Egyptians is the same as the Artemis, Diana, of the Greeks, //er. 2, 18j. Bast is often represented both sitting and standing, with the cat or lion's head, disc, and Enris holding the amulet of life, the A7-9. She is sometimes found holding in her right hand a sistrum, car 3dng. On her left arm a basket, and holding in her left hand an aegis. She is always represented as a woman, and very often a prayer accompanies the figure, one of which is, "May she grant all life and power, all health and joy of heart," or "I am Bast, the Lady of Life." The panegyrics or festivals, that were held by the people at the various temples of Aoi Pt, sank into comparative insignificance compared with the festivities which took place in Bubastis, whose magnificent temple was the favorite resort of men, women, and children. These came from every nome in EG3 Pt, to participate in the sacrifices and licentious festivities indulged in by all who sought best. The would come down the river and canals, by boats, in immense numbers, the men beating drums and playing on pipes, and the women beating cymbals in time with the music, while those who had no instruments would accompany the harmony, by beating time with their hands, shouting, and behaving in a very indecent manner, much after the stjle of the v/omen who participate in the festival of Ceres at Eleusis. On arriving at Bubastis, they would offer sacrifices and form processions, being led by men who played the pipe, the rest would fall low and perform most indecent acts while dancing, shouting and making all kinds of gestures in a very debauched condition and in drunken abandonment. The number annual assembling here to participate in the panegyrics of Bast, has been estimated at 700,000 men and women, not including children. The first king of the 20-carat second dynasty, Sisankais, or Shishonk, was contemporary Avith Solomon, king of Israel. The scripture name of this Egyptian king was Shishak. During the latter part of the reign of Solomon he tried to kill Jeroboam, who in order to save his life, fled into Egypt, and no doubt to the city of Bubastis, taking refuge with Shishak. On his return he introduced some of the Egyptian divinities to the people of Israel. Afterwards Shishak invaded and captured the fenced cities of Judah and Benjamin, and took possession of Jerusalem, after which he carried away with him into Egypt the vast treasures that Solomon had collected. /_see 2 Kings. Chap. 13. The historic names found upon monuments and sculptures of Bubastis, range from Khufu of the 4th dynasty to Ptolemy Urgida II. There are also to be found among the ruins the name of Ramses II, Ozarkhan I, Amyrtius and others. The ruins of this magnificent city lie scattered around in bewildering confusion. There is, no doubt, many beautiful statues, lotus, palm leaf, and hatherhead capitals, shrouded in the drifting sands, which may never be brought to the light of day to testify to their wondrous skill and knowledge in the art of carving. One very important discovery was made in the ruins of this once famous city, and that was a fallen pylon of the time of Ozarkhan II. The carving upon it furnishes a description of a very important festival, which is of great interest to scholars of the present day, as it explains everything pertaining to it in all its details. The temples of Lower Egypt differ considerably from those of Upper Egypt. In those above Cairo, or the delta of the Nile, the walls are built of sandstone and the columns are made of different pieces, while granite is confined to the pylons, monuments, statues, etc. In the delta the temples were built principally of granite, the vestibules, etc., having columns of a single stone of the same material. From the hypostyle hall of this celebrated, magnificent red granite temple of Bubastis, came 3 valuable specimens of ancient Egyptian workmanship, now in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, consisting of a hather-headed capital, a lotus bud capital, and a tablet on which Amen-Ra is represented enthroned on a dais that is reached by a series of steps, towards which a procession is apparently going for the purpose of rendering homage to the great god of Egypt, the son of Ptah. The Egyptians affirmed of him, that he was one, the only one. He formed the Jers carat in the great triad of Thebes Amen, Mut, and Jansu. The ruins of Bubastis are composed of large dark mounds of debris, plainly visible from the railroad. There is little to be seen here that will interest the traveler of today, except the mutilated remains of this once magnificent city, unless he is desirous of identifying the shattered remains with the descriptions by Herodotus, Rawlinson, and others. If so, he will be enabled to verify the statements made by these authorities respecting its site, surroundings, and magnitude. One thing is certain, he will see the great height of the mounds and the enormous blocks of beautiful red granite that Herodotus admired so much in the temple itself, and will also be enabled to recognize the site of both the temple of Bast and Mercury. Herodotus states in Book 2, Chaps. 66 and 67, that if a cat dies in a private house by a natural death, all the inmates of the house shave their eyebrows, and on the death of a dog they shave the head and the whole of the body. Cats, dying in any part of Egypt, were taken to the ancient city of Bubastis in order to be embalmed, after which they were deposited in a special place made for the purpose, but all dogs were buried in the various towns to which they belonged, and in certain receptacles provided for the burial of their bodies. Ancient Euroitics-copyrights AFH 3, TLJ 1 Lyerma. Co thine abode, to thine abode, O come, co thine abode, God HN, I thee implore, thine enemies exist not any more, return, O glorious sovereign, to thine home. I am thy sister, whom thou hast embraced, look on me, X, thy sister, loving thee, O, beauteous youth, stay thou not far from MC. But come to thine abode with haste, with haste. X see thee not, and to my heart doth throng anguish for thee, and bitterness untold, mine eyes seek to thee, wishing to behold ere X behold will it be long. Bow long, O glorious sovereign, must I yearn. Before the sight of thee mine eyes shall bless. God HN, beholding thee is happiness, Koher who loveth thee, return, return. O, on Nefer, the justified in state. Come to thy sister, come unto thy wife, O, QRT head. Lo, one mother gave us life, CHYSCLF from me no longer separate. Che gods and men towards thee turn their faces, sleeping for thee when they behold my tears. X make lament, but there is none that bears, ea, though with plaint, unto the heavenly places. I, who so loved thee here on earth, do cry, Chai sister, none hath loved thee more than X quoted from the hymns of ancient Egypt, Rawasli. Chapter 3. Ancient Cities Assyrian Myth Karma. VFTER viewing Tly remains of the most extraordinary and wondered K full cities mentioned in the preceding chapter, we must certainly realize the absurdity of giving credit to the stories that claim for certain men the honor of being the inventors and promoters of the early sciences. For instance, it has been claimed by many that Archimedes, who was born in Syracuse, on the island of Sicily, in the year BC 237 conceived the application of the lever and screw. Why, there is not one of these buildings that I have mentioned, in which the lever, screw, and wedge were not practically applied by our ancient brethren, long centuries before the dawn of authenticated history, to move the immense blocks of granite and sandstone used in the construction of the stupendous tombs, temples, and monuments which adorn the whole length and breadth of the land of Egypt. Go back to the pyramids of Egypt, standing today in the plains of Giza, and we can realize that every one of them must have been known at that time, and were most assuredly used by our ancient craftsmen, who wrought in the quarries of the Mokattam Hills, Libyan mountains, and elsewhere, and practically applied them in their work, not only of quarrying, but in the building of those wonderful fabrics. We have ocular demonstrations that the science of mathematics was thoroughly comprehended by the practical operative masons long centuries before Abraham saw the stars glitter in the plains of Shinar. If we go today into the quarries of Cyane, we shall be enabled to see, not only their methods of quarrying, but the holes that were drilled for the wedges, and actually see the wedges, as they were placed by the craftsmen before Christ. It has also been claimed by many that Galileo, an Italian mathematician and philosopher, who was born at Pisa, A.D. 1504, invented the telescope with a lead pipe and two lenses. Why, the ancient inhabitants of Central America understood the method of focusing lenses in tubes, for one of their most ancient carvings represents a man looking through a telescope, thus demonstrating their knowledge in the use of them. Jensen is credited with having invented the compound microscope in the year A.D. 1590. We can prove that it was only a rediscovery of what had existed long before Christ was born. Cicero, who was born at Arpamifu, e.c. 106, declares that he saw the whole of Ho 7 Ne 7-S Iliad written on a skin, which might be rolled up and placed inside a walnut shell. Mr. Layard in his explorations discovered a rough magnifying lens in the Palace Oj Nimrod that was made of rock crystal, and he also says, in writing of his discoveries in Nineveh, the engravings on some of the stones were so small that they could only be read by the aid of very powerful glasses. Does this not show that the microscope must have been known at that period, otherwise how could the poem have been written or the stones carved? Aristophanes states that burning spheres were sold in the stores at Athens in his day, b.c. 400. In the latter part of the wonderful 19th century we had arrived at a knowledge of manufacturing colored glass, and today in this 20th century we have improved considerably in this art of making beautiful glass, for the purpose of decorating the windows of our cathedrals, churches, and palatial residences, as well as for the various utensils for household purposes, as well as in imitation of precious stones. This art is claimed as a modern invention. In unearthing the celebrated city of Pompeii, destroyed on the 24th day of August, in the year A.D. 79, the workmen discovered a glass factory in which there was an immense quantity of glass, including magnificent specimens of gem imitations, capable of deceiving a dealer himself, if he were not very careful in his examinations. In the 11th century the Arabians knew the secret of manufacturing malleable glass, and so perfect was their knowledge that they could anneal and draw it out into threads for weaving. During the reign of Tiberius malleable glass was known and glass cups were manufactured and used that could be crushed, but not broken. The glass blowers of Thebes and Memphis are known to have been as proficient in the art of making all kinds of glass as is the most expert workman of today. The manufacturing of the beautiful opalescent glass that they produced could never have been carried on without a knowledge of the metallic oxides by which they colored, not only their glass, but their pottery as well, and this knowledge most assuredly involves an acquaintance with the science of chemistry, which science no doubt received its name from the ancient name of the land of Egypt, Chemi. Ross Eleni gives us an illustration of a piece of colored glass that is known to be 4,000 years old. The priests of the temples, in both Memphis and Thebes, were experts in the art of manufacturing all kinds of glass. They thoroughly understood the art of vitrifying all the different colors, and the imitation of precious stones they brought to the highest state of perfection. The imitation gems they manufactured for the temples of Ptah at Memphis were so natural that, after the lapse of 40 centuries, those lost in the shrouding desert sands, when found, would take an expert to distinguish the true from the false. In the British Museum there is an exquisite piece of stained glass, with a very fine engraved emblazonment upon it, of King Thutmose III, one of Egypt's celebrated monarchs who lived and reigned 34 centuries ago. This piece of work itself would prove to us that the ancient Egyptians made use of the diamond in cutting and engraving. The Hebrew people were very expert in the art of engraving, which they no doubt learned from the Egyptians, in the field of Zoan, see Exodus 28:11. Electricity, the force and power that is revolutionizing the world today, and contributes so immeasurably to our comfort, in driving our cars and carriages, lighting our houses, even carrying our very thoughts to the four corners of the earth, was most certainly known to these ancient people and was possibly used for the very same purposes that we do today. See Job 38:35. It would be simply impossible for any man to describe something he had never seen or heard of, therefore, Job must have known of the working of the telegraph, otherwise he never could have described it. Many people call this the age of steel, and look upon it as a discovery belonging exclusively to the 19th century. My dear brothers, did you ever examine the implements cf. War belonging to ancient India, or the celebrated swords of Damascus? I assure you, my dear friends and brothers, steel has been used in every dynasty of pharaonic history. In fact, her temples, tombs, sculptures, obelisks and hieroglyphic inscriptions were carved and written with pens of steel by our ancient craftsmen, when the songs of Solomon were not, ere Moses was lifted from the flowing waters of the river Nile. Colonel Howard Vyse, during his investigations of the P3-carat Ramids, in the plains of Giza, found a piece of iron or steel in one of the joints of the stones that formed the Great Pyramid carat, which must certainly have been placed there during its construction by one of the workmen. In the tomb of Ramses IV, the implements of war that are painted upon the walls are colored blue, to represent steel weapons. It would have been impossible for the craftsmen to have quarried the stones with which to build their extraordinary monuments, without a knowledge of steel, and how to make it. Mr. Laird, during his explorations in Nineveh, discovered 60 camel loads of pickaxes. In the time of Sil there were no persons capable of forging among the Israelites, is Samuel 13:15, but during the reign of David they had an abundance of cunning mechanics who were capable. Any person who visits the tombs and temples of Egypt will certainly realize that their builders had a thorough knowledge, not only of the lever and wedge, but the pick, stone saw, chisel and the various tools needed in quarrying and building such extraordinary edifices. One glance at those gigantic pyramids will thoroughly demonstrate this fact to even the most skeptical. The art of weaving fine linen and rich cloth is so very old that we are unable to trace it to the source from which it emanated, but there is one thing certain: the ancient Eoshades used linen of remarkable gossamer-like tissue. Wilkinson tells us in his Manners and Customs, Volume 3, 19, of a specimen of linen which excites admiration at the present day, being to the touch comparable to silk, and not inferior in texture to the finest cambric. This has 540 threads to the inch in the warp, and 110 in the woof. Being considerably finer than the richest cambric ever seen in this or any other country. Ignatius Donnelly in Atlantis, page 365, tells us of the ancient Thracians, that they had clocks and dials for measuring time. They possessed gold and silver money, and were the first agriculturists of the Old World, raising cereals, cattle, horses, and sheep. They also manufactured linen of so fine a quality that in the days of King Amasis, 600 years B.C., a single thread of a garment was composed of 365 minor threads, worked in gold and silver, copper, bronze, and iron, and tempered iron to the hardness of steel. They were the first chemists. The word chemistry comes from Sijami carat and Shini I means Egypt. They manufactured glass and all kinds of pottery, made boats out of earthenware, and precisely as we do now, made railroad car wheels of paper, and also manufactured vessels of paper. Their dentists filled teeth with gold, and their farmers hatched poultry with artificial heat. They were the first musicians, possessing guitars, single and double pipes, cymbals, drums, lyres, harps, flutes, the sambric and ashur. They had even castanets, such as are now used in Spain. In medicine and surgery they had reached such a degree of perfection that several years B.C. the operation for cataract upon the carat E was performed among them, one of the most delicate and difficult feats of surgery, only attempted by us in the most recent times. The papyrus of Berlin was discovered, rolled up in a case, under the feet of Anubis, in the town of Sikhem, in the days of Tet, or Thoth, after whose death it was transmitted to King Sent, and was then restored to the feet of the statue. King Sent belonged to the second dynasty, which flourished c. 4751, and the papyrus was old in his day. This papyrus is a medical treatise, containing no incantations or charms, but dealing in reasonable remedies, drafts, unguents, and injections. The later medical papyri contain a great deal of magic and incantations. Egypt was the magnificent, the Golden Bridge, 10,000 years long, glorious with temples and pyramids, illuminated and illustrated / why the most complete and continuous records of human history, along which the civilization of Atlantis, in a great procession of kings and priests, philosophers and astronomers, artists and artisans streamed forward to Greece, to Rome, to Europe, to America. As far back in the ages as the eye can penetrate, even where the perspective dwindles almost to a point, we can still see the swarming multitudes, possessed of the arts of the highest civilization, passing forward from out other and greater empire, of which even this wonder world Isle land is but a faint and imperfect copy. Semmenut is the site of the Sebanite nome that gave its name to the 30th dynasty. It was founded by its erst king, Nectane Boi, who successfully defended his country against the attacks of the Persians and Greek mercenaries under Pharnabazus and Iphicrates. After Nectane Bo defeated these invaders of his country, he spent the rest of his life in tranquility and peace. It was during the reign of this king that Plato visited Egypt, for the purpose of investigating the religions and philosophies of this country, and he, like Pythagoras, was initiated into the ancient rites and ceremonies, from which our own glorious Scottish rite has descended, of whose esoteric teachings I shall speak later. The ancient Egyptian name of Sebennytus was Tebennuter, which the cuneiform inscription translates Zabnuter. In this city Manetho, the celebrated Egyptian historian, is said to have been born. He was a high priest of the temple of Isis in Sebennytus, the modern Semmenad. Manetho, in ancient Egyptian, was written My ch Thoth, which signified beloved of Thoth. He lived in the reign of Ptolemy Logi, and he was noted for his scholarly attainments, a man of the highest reputation, who thoroughly understood the Greek language, in consequence of which he was requested by Ptolemy to Philadelphus, to translate the historical records that had been preserved in the sacred repositories of the temples of Egypt. He was an Egyptian priest, and authorized by Ptolemy himself to give to the world a history of his own country, Egypt, with which he was so thoroughly acquainted. He had access to the archives of all the temples throughout the land of Egypt, and I claim that these facts alone should impress the student with the truth of each and every one of his statements, ever remembering that he was a man of the highest reputation and ability. This history was held in high estimation, but was subsequently lost, and all that remains to us of this most valuable and scholarly work today, is the chronological list of the kings of the various dynasties, transmitted to us through the Jewish and Christian chronographers. Mariette Bey states, in his Monuments of Upper Egypt, that the system of contemporaneous dynasties is as yet supported by no really trustworthy proof. On the contrary, it seems certain that Manetho was well aware that, at various epochs, Egypt was governed simultaneously by several dynasties, and he availed himself of the means at his disposal to strike out of his work all such dynasties as did not belong to the general series of royal houses who succeeded each other on the throne, so that the latter were alone offi chally enrolled in due order on the register of kings. The reason Mariette makes this statement is because there are many authorities who claim that Manetho cites various dynasties as successive that were contemporaneous. If this were truth and the fact could be proven, we should have to deduct from the total amount the duration of these various dynasties, said to have been falsely placed upon the roll belonging to regular consecutive dynasties of Egyptian history. The dates taken from Manetho are not in accordance with extracts culled from Julius Africanus and Eusebius, yet the two versions of the Chronicle of Eusebius do not agree with each other. Therefore the authority of Manetho, as a chronologist, remains unshaken, but on condition that we only take the dates which he gives us as approximate. It is certain that those dates are not absolutely exact, yet it is difficult to believe that they have been so radically altered as not in any degree to come near the truth. The nearer we approach the source of those alterations, the more we shall feel compelled to admit that if the original lists could but have reached us intact, from the hand of Manetho himself, we would find them extending over a still wider range of time. There is no question but that Manetho's figures have suffered serious alterations. But if we consider the figures as coming down to us through Christian writers, who had an evident purpose in curtailing them, we shall find, as a matter of fact, that this is far from ascribing too wide a range to them, and are bound, as fair critics, to accept them as having been systematically reduced in their total amount. There is no nation which ever existed in the world's history whose manners, customs, arts, sciences, and philosophies are more easily traced than those of the ancient Egyptians, because she has not only written her own history, and carved it upon her tombs and temples, but she has given us keys by which we are enabled to decipher the hieroglyphic inscriptions and phonetic characters in the various stele, such as the Rosetta stone, the famous trilingual stone that was discovered by Dr. Lepsius, the stele found Karat Mariette Bay in the Temple of Seti, and the many papyrus rolls that have been discovered at various times and places, despite the tooth of time and war's bloody hand, passing unscathed through the ravages of long drifting ages. These evidences of her civilization and intellectual advancement, with the treasures found in her buried cities, as well as those found under the drifting sands of the desert, in the gnomes of a prehistoric age, confirm what Manetho has written of his country. I need not mention every or any special place from which we have obtained fragmentary records, but simply state that every tomb, temple, monument, mummy case, and contents have given us historical and genealogical records which not only confirm, but supplement what was written by our ancient brother Manetho, whose name had been endorsed by the tongue of good Ruperf, who had been proven worthy and well qualified, a man of the highest reputation, an archimagus of the ancient Egyptian mysteries, whose name, like that of our revered brother, the late General Albert Pike, Hierophant of the 19th century, will never die, but, like his works, writings and integrity, will stand the most crucial test and come forth from the trial and investigation, an honor to the ancient mysteries and its lineal descendant, our beloved ancient and accepted Scottish rite of Freemasonry. Cinnamon or Skmvithant is a typical Egyptian town of about 11,000 inhabitants. It is noted for its celebrated pottery, which is manufactured there and sent to all the larger cities, where it finds a ready sale throughout the whole of Egypt. It has the usual bazaars and mud hovels and all the peculiar concomitants that go to make up the peculiarities of typical Egyptian towns. Nectanebo XI was the last of the Sabanite sovereigns, and was also the last of those native Egyptian kings who ruled Egypt from c. 5004 to c. 340. To the north of Semmenad, and south of Mansoura lies the ancient city of Izuni, in the Sabanite nome. It is now called Babai-Icl Hagar, while the ancient Eoy knew it as Hcbt or Pahet. It was called the town of the panegyrics, from the Egyptian name of Pahet. It is also called the city of the Stue, which derives its Arab name, Babit el Hagar, on account of the very large number of stones to be seen there, once going to form a part of the beautiful decorations of this magnificent city, now scattered around in promiscuous confusion. The ruins of this celebrated city are very much inferior to the site in the field of Zoan, as well as that of Eubastis, but notwithstanding this fact, it will well repay the traveler, or student of ancient Egyptian history, for the time spent in visiting these celebrated ruins, and in viewing the fragmentary remains of those beautiful carvings, executed in the peculiar colored granite. used to adorn and beautify this once famous site of the Ptolemies. The traveler will most assuredly have unmistakable proofs of the deity that was worshipped here, in the numerous sculptures and carvings of an animal sacred to the goddess Isis, the cause of carat, and also the exceedingly large number of figures with cow heads. From this alone we judge that Isis was the principal deity worshipped there, as doubtless both the Greeks and Romans called the city Izum or Ision. The chief deities that were worshipped in this city were the Osirian triad Isis, Osiris and Horns. Osiris was a form of the sun god, Ra and the child of Sebae the earth, and Niav the heavens, in Aoitian mythology, who was the presiding judge in Amenti. His wife Isis represented the dawn and their son was Horns, the sun, in his full power and glory. On a figure of the goddess found here was carved the following: Isis, Miss. Tress of head. There is another very interesting piece of work carved on a slab of grey granite, streaked with red, on which there is a representation of the king offering a gift of land to Osiris and Isis, the great divine mistress of Hebet. The name of Ptolemy II, Philadelphus I, occurs in various parts of this tem.ple, who founded it, b. c. 284-2/16. His name appears in the dedications, while he presents the various offerings to the various gods. The temple alone must have cost an immense sum, as it was built of a very fine peculiar grey and red granite, now lying scattered around, broken and mutilated. There are among them fragments of architraves, slabs, columns, and blocks of all shapes and kinds of stone, some square, others circular shaped, and many with very fine carvings upon them, both in intaglio and in relief. Some of these have very large hieroglyphic inscriptions carved upon them, while others are comparatively small, but excellently well executed. There is one peculiar feature about the ruins of this temple, and that is, a different kind of granite has been used in its construction from that which composed the temples of Upper Egypt. It seems as if a special effort had been made to exclude every kind of stone from this building that was used in the construction of the other temples outside the delta. It is too bad that this building should have been so completely demolished, because we are unable to trace, with any degree of exactitude, the plan of the temple. Its destruction is no doubt due to the natives undermining the building in order to procure the limestone, to burn and sell. Murray describes one of the walls of this temple as follows: on one of the walls about the center of the temple is represented the sacred boat or ark of Isis, and in the shrine it bears the lad of Pahet. Seated between two figures of goddesses, like the Jewish cherubim, who seem to protect her with their wings. They occur in two compartments, one over the other, at the center of the shrine. These figures were, doubtless, the holy and unseen contents of the sacred repository which no profane eye was permitted to behold, being generally covered with a veil. In the upper one Isis is seated on a lotus flower and the two figures standing, while in the other all three are seated and below are four kneeling figures, one with a man's, the other three with jackals' heads, beating their breasts. At either end of the boat is the head of the goddess, and the legend above shows it to have belonged to her. The king stands before it, presenting an offering of incense to Isis. There appears to be a very great variety in the sculptures, which mostly represent offerings to Isis, and the contemplar deities, as in other Ptolemaic buildings. In one place the hawk-headed whore conducts the king into the presence of the goddess of the temple, but the battle scenes and grand religious processions of old times are wanting here, as in other temples of a Ptolemaic and Roman epoch, and though the sculptures are rich, being highly finished, they are deficient in the elegance of a pharaonic age, the fault of all Greco-Egyptian sculptures, and one which strikes every eye accustomed to monuments erected before the decadence of art in Egypt. This temple, today, is in a demolished condition, with debris of all kinds piled and scattered promiscuously around, and all kinds of stone lying one upon another, in the wildest confusion. Notwithstanding this fact, it is possible for one to go down beneath the masses of rubbish and stones, 10 or a dozen feet, through various openings between the larger stones, where could be seen shattered parts of architraves, cornices, and large granite columns, crowned with the head of Isis, very fine specimens of the Ptolemaic age, but more especially of the granite carvings in relief, which must have taken an immense amount of time, labor, and patience. One thing that was plainly to be seen, was parts of the ceiling, with the usual five-pointed star upon a blue ground, just such stars as are to be found upon the ceilings of our own beloved Scottish Rite cathedrals today. Herodotus says Osiris was situated in the very middle of the delta, which was the next site in importance to Bubastes, for the splendors of its ceremonies during the festival of Isis, Book 2, Chapter 59. Diodorus informs us that there were two places called Bi-Isurus in Egypt. Bi-Isurus signifies Tg burial place of Osiris. Wilkinson says, in Note 6, Chapter 61, of Herodotus, the city of His was lower down the river, and it is more probable that the fate of Isis was held there than at Bisurus. It is now called Babate and its site is marked by the ruin of a granite temple, the only one, except that at Bubastes, entirely built of that beautiful and costly material. It was doubtless thought worthy to succeed the very large temple that was dedicated to Isis, of which Herodotus speaks, for it was built during the reign of the Ptolemies and it was formerly called Isium, and by the ancient Egyptians Hebai, or Hebate, of which Isis is named in the sculptures. The mistress of Hetje Hebai signifies a carat panegyriath or assembly, and this was the real meaning of the name of the place. Osiris is also sometimes spoken of in the legends as Lord Oj the Leviat of Hebai. Now this shows that it was not the city of Bisurus that was second in importance in Egypt for the magnificence of its ceremonies, during the festival in honor of the goddess Isis, according to Herodotus, but Babit el-Hagar, or Pahet the city of the stone carrot or the town of the Pangyris, the city I have just described to you. I stated previously that Osiris was one of the principal deities worshipped in the city. In fact he was worshipped throughout the whole of Egypt, Ethiopia, Greece, and Rome. No doubt the worship of this god was also introduced among the tribes of the children of Israel by Jeroboam on his return to his own country. Osiris is always represented // a human head sitting on a throne, as a king or judge in the halls of Amenti Karat or in the form of a mummy, but in either case he always carries the scourge and crook, wearing upon his head the crown of Upper Egypt, which is very often decorated with the plumes of truth, while beside him stands the thyrsus carrot, the vine and ivy twined staff of the Bacchantes, enwrapped with a leopard's skin. He was the judge of the Amenti or lord of the underworld, the king of eternity. Of all the gods of Egypt he is the only one who has a regular, detailed, mythical history, like the gods of Grecian mythology. Herodotus says that Osiris was considered to be the Bacchus of the Greeks, and Diodorus states that Osiris has been considered the same as Serapis, Bacchus, Pluto, or Ammon. Others have thought him Jupiter, many Pen. The ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions identify Apis, the sacred bull, worshipped at Memphis during the Second Dynasty with Osiris, claiming that he was the god Osiris reincarnated in the shape of a bull. The mythical legend of this celebrated god is related by Plutarch as follows: Rhea, having secretly united herself with Saturn, the sun, becoming indignant, laid upon her a curse, that she should not bring forth in any year or month. Mercury, however, who was also a lover of Rhea, playing at dice with the moon, took away the 17th part of each period of daylight, and from these made 5 new days, which are the epigomenae or intercalary days. 70 here stands, as elsewhere, a round number instead of the precise one, for 72. 5 being the 72nd part of 360. On each of these 5 days Rhea bore a child. On the first day Osiris, the son of the sun, was born, at whose birth a voice was heard proclaiming that the Lord of all was coming to light, or, according to another ver. Zion, Pomils, drawing water in the temple of Jupiter, heard a voice, which enjoined upon him to proclaim that the great and beneficent King Osiris was born. This Pomils received him to nurse, and hence the festival of the Pomilia, which was a Philiphoria. On the second day was born Oroens, son of the sun, whom they call Apollo, and the elder Horus. On the third was born Typlion, not in the usual course, but bursting out with a sudden stroke from the side of Rhea. On the fourth day was born Isis, the daughter of Hermes. On the fifth Nephthys, who was called Talut, the end, and Aphrodite, and according to some, Nike. Typhon and Nephthys were the children of Cithaeron and married each other. In consequence of the birth of Typhon, the third day of the Epigomene was a dies Ekphases, and the kings of Egypt neither transacted public business nor took the usual care of their persons till night. Isis and Osiris reminded themselves even before their birth, and their son was called, according to some, X/Rores, or the elder Horus. The more common account, however, made the son of Osiris and Isis to be the younger Horus. Osiris, being king, instructed the Egyptians in the arts of civilization, taught them agriculture, enacted laws for them, and established the worship of the gods. He afterwards traversed the world for the same purpose, subduing the nations, not by arms, but by persuasion, and especially by the charms of music and poetry, which gave the Greeks occasion to identify him with Dionysus. In his absence Isis administered the regency so wisely that Typhon was unable to create any disturbance, but on his return he conspired against Osiris with 72 men and the Ethiopian queen, Aso, who having secretly obtained the measure of Osiris, caused a coffin, splendidly adorned, to be brought into the banqueting hall, promising to give it to the guest whom it should fit. Osiris put himself into it to make trial, and Typhon and his associates immediately pegged and soldered down the case and set it afloat on the river. It floated to the Tanatic mouth, which, on that account, the Thracians held accursed. These things were done on the 17th of the month Athur, in which the sun enters Scorpion, and in the 28th year of the Regri, or as some said, of the age of Osiris. The Pans and Satyrs, who lived about Chemes, hearing of these events and being agitated hie them into sudden terrors, obtained the name of panics. Isis cut off her hair and put on mourning at the place where she first heard the news, whence it obtained the name Koptos, signifying to mourn for the dead. Meeting some boys, she heard from them where the coffin had floated. And hence the Egyptians deemed the words of boys to carry with them a divine meaning. Osiris had, by mistake, united himself with Nephthys, and a son had been born to him, whom Nephthys hid immediately from his birth. Isis sought him out and found him by the guidance of a dog, who attended her thenceforth, and was called Anubis. Meanwhile the chest had been floated to Byblos and cast ashore. The plant Erica, a narrow-leafed evergreen Sliriab, had grown up about it and enclosed it, and in this state it had been made use of as a pillar to support the palace of the king. Isis arrived, divinely conducted, in search of it, and recommending herself to the queen's maidens, had the charge of the young prince committed to her. She then obtained possession of the chest, and opening it, carried it to Buto, where Horus was being brought up. The event of her return was celebrated by sacrifices on the 17th day of the month Tibi, and the figure of a hippopotamus bound, was impressed upon the sacrificial cakes, as an emblem of the defeat of Typhon. Here she deposited the body in secrecy, but Typhon, hunting by moonlight, found it and cut it into 14 pieces. Isis, in a baris made of papyrus, traversed the marshes, and when she found one of the members, buried it there, whence the number of reputed places of interment of Osiris. In the end she found all the members but one, which had been devoured by the and Sphagrus and Lepidatus. Isis, therefore, made an emblem of it, whence the honors still paid to it be the Egyptians, probably though Plutarch does not expressly say so. Isis was conceived to have recomposed the body from the limbs thus recovered. Osiris returned from Hades and gave his aid to Horus, who was preparing to overthrow the power of Typhon. Typhon fell into the hands of Isis, but she released him, at which Horus was so enraged that he plucked his mother's diadem from her head, and Mercury supplied its place by a helmet in the form of cow's head. 2 other battles took place before Typhon was finally subdued. Harpocrates was born from the union of Isis and Osiris, after the death of Osiris, and was consequently imperfect with a weakness in his low-wer limbs. Such is the myth as related by Plutarch and by Kenrick in ancient Egypt. Baedeker's Lower Egypt tells us that Osiris was not actually killed by Typhon. He simply went to the underworld and there continued his existence. It was Lai who trained and armed his son Horns to do battle against Typhon, in which he eventually became victorious by defeating Typhon, but not in totally destroying him. With the assistance of Osiris they banished him to the infernal regions. Osiris is also regarded as the moisture falling upon the earth, the most perfect representation of which is the inundation of the river Nile. While Tj-Phon and his 72 companions, the intercalary days, which represented the days of drought that dominated the earth, during which time Isis becomes sorrowful, longing, hoping for the return of Osiris, she mourns his absence, until eventually he returns, when Typhon is defeated and the fertile earth, Xyz, is again dominated by the flooding waters of the river Nile, Osiris, when an abundance is assured. Osiris is regarded as the principle of life. Isis, the earth, is the scene of the operation of that principle, while Typhon represents death, and Horns the resurrection. If we regard Osiris, as the monuments so frequently do, as a pure and perfect being, the principle of the good, and the beautiful, in which case he receives the surname of Un-Neferer, we recognize in Typhon the discords with which life is so replete, but which seem to be permitted in order that the purity of the harmonies into which they are resolved, through the intervention of Horns, may be the more thorough appreciated. Osiris, according to the exoteric doctrine, is also the sovereign of the lower regions and judge of souls, which, if found pure, are permitted to unite with his. The dead, therefore, do not merely go to Osiris, but actually become Osiris. Osiris according to Wilkinson, was ranked or belonged to the third order of gods, and had the honor of being the god whose mysteries contain the most important secrets. His rites comprised the chief part of the Egyptian wisdom. He was the chief of Amitidi or Hades and was a Jaivala as well as an infernal diet 3. There was also an important reason for his being of the last or newest order of gods, related particularly to man, the last and most perfect work of the creation, and as the deity was at first the monad, then the creator, creation being God. Passing into activity, he did not become Osiris until man was placed upon the earth. He there manifested himself also, like Buddha for the benefit of man, who looked upon him for happiness in a future state. In all the representation of the judgment of the dead, Osiris is always represented seated upon a throne, surrounded by certain gods and goddesses, paraphernalia, etc., holding within his hands the scourge and crook, and generally with his arms crossed upon his breast, while close beside him stands the thyrsus entwined with the spotted leopard's skin. He is generally attended by Isis and Nephthys,